started? All right, we are going to go ahead and get started, Commissioners. Before us, you see on the screen the agenda for today. So we will start with the District Court, and then we'll do Planning and Master Plan Review, General Fund Statement, Affordable Housing, Capital Discussion, and then questions. So Gary, welcome.
Madam Mayor, if I could start a little bit, please.
Sure.
So I want to also welcome Gary here. We've had a long relationship, and you'll see as we go through this that the court submitted one budget plan and then went back and thought again and worked to provide a second budget plan, which is a plan that will be included in your budget in the final version. So we also talked about setting up a ongoing relationship, which I appreciate. So using our court committee liaison committee. So I want you to be sure that you know that those things have transpired and are ready to go. So that's the context in which Gary will present today.
Great,
okay.
Thank you. And I know those of you from the commission who serve on the court and city liaison committee, thank you for your work. I know that you've met, and I think there's other meetings set up.
We will set up meetings.
Okay.
We haven't done it yet. Okay,
great. All right. So Gary, welcome.
Well, thank you. Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. It's a pleasure for me to be back before the City Commission again this year to give you an overview of our 2019 budget. Initially, I'd like to point out that this is the 50th anniversary of district courts in the state of Michigan. They were established in 2018. Most of them went into effect in 2019. The 61st District Court was one of the first original 99 courts that were established under the 63 Michigan Constitution, which enacted those courts. So happy anniversary.
Just celebrate.
This is just an update of our judges and magistrates. The judges haven't changed any, but the order in terms of who's primarily responsible has changed. That changes every 2 years pursuant to the Michigan Supreme Court. Judge David Buter is now our chief judge, and I point out that our judge pro tem is Judge Michael J. Distel. Previously, Judge LaVille was the chief judge. Those that saw the presentation last year, you saw this presentation. I just like to emphasize that among courts in the state of Michigan, we're considered the people's court. Certainly in the city of Grand Rapids, in that courthouse, it has 2,500 visitors a day. 300,000 of those can be attributed directly to doing business with the district court. Over 50% of the people that come into the district court every day are doing business with our court, as opposed to the probate court and the circuit court. 87% of the court users said they were treated with courtesy and respect by court staff. 81% of court users said the way the judge or magistrate handled their case was fair, and 80% of court users were able to get their business done in a reasonable amount of time. So for those of you that had experience with the court, you know it's not always a pleasurable experience. So I think those are tremendous numbers in terms of public's determination of how we do business. And we're required to do those every 2 years, and our 2018 survey, public satisfaction survey, started today, by the way. Oops. There we go. By way of highlights, for 2017 court initiatives and improvements, we installed direct access line to Grand Rapids Police Department in courtroom 7B, which is our magistrate's courtroom, which hears most of the informal traffic hearings. This was a significant improvement. It was by the request of the Grand Rapids Police Department. Previously, what the police department had to do is bring over discs to replay their video cams. Now they have a direct access to the data right at the police department. They come in to testify, they pull that information right up, and it comes up on the screen in the magistrate's courtroom. We increased court cost fees from $75 to $125. We implemented an online traffic and bench warrant resolution program. This has also significantly reduced the Grand Rapids PD and citizen time requirements to appear for informal traffic hearings. And what that basically does, those individuals that would generally want to contest a hearing would have to come into court and appear before the magistrate, and the Grand Rapids Police Department would have to pull either their officers off the street to come in and testify at the same time, either that or provide them overtime. What this does is let an individual go online and submit a request for consideration. The police department then reviews that request, and if they've got a suitable driving record, which was pre-approved for consideration by the city attorney's office and the Grand Rapids Police Department and our bench, then it's then sent to the magistrate, and probably, I think, last I saw, 95% of the cases that were contested were reduced to impeding traffic, which is no points on their record. But we also increased the fine up to 135, so we weren't losing revenue off of normal traffic tickets. And the citizens and the police department have been very appreciative of that initiative. We assisted the city in development of the Michigan Indigent Defense Plan. I'll go into that a little bit later, but Eric and I worked very closely on submitting this plan that will go into effect sometime within the next 2 years. Reviewing alternatives to submit Supreme Court ability to pay directives and court rules. I'm sure that you've seen that initiatives that are coming out with regards to bonds and everything else, and court's determination on ability to pay, which has had a significant impact on the court's ability to collect revenues. We've established a new court website, and we began an imaging pilot for record storage. Most of our record storage has been by Kent Records, and instead of doing storage out at the mines now, we are digitizing all those records, and hopefully we'll be significantly reducing our footprint out there. Now for 2018, the Michigan Indigent Defense Plan was developed, was submitted, and was finally approved. We implemented in coordination with the city, and Connie Bohatch and her department, the Salvation Army, and the Department of Health and Human Services, and the eviction prevention program. That is being done as a pilot in Judge Distal and Judge Favors courts. I'm pleased to announce that we've been able to at least save upwards of 60 individuals from evictions up to this point in time with a pilot. We've established an agreement with EOS USA Services for collections on delinquent marijuana civil infractions, traffic and parking citation collections, and that will be going into production next month. We assumed, working with the city treasurer's office and John and his department, first and second delinquent parking citations. John approached us, I want to say maybe 8 months ago, and felt that he wasn't getting a good collection rate in terms of private collection agencies, was somewhere down around 10%, and thought we might be able to do a better job, as our standard is right around 73 to 75% collection rate on parking citations. So this is something that we did cooperatively with his department, because statutorily we're not required to collect on these. Statutorily we only have enforcement action on 3 and above citations. But he felt that the weight of the court might improve, and I think we can significantly improve over the 10% rate, certainly. And we're hoping somewhere around the 40 to 50% rate on these first and second time offenders. Commissioner?
Can you give me the number again for the eviction prevention program?
I think we're somewhere between 55 and 60, but I can verify that and get that back to you. We've expanded our online traffic resolution program. Overview, we were just doing civil infractions on primarily speeding tickets, but we've expanded that to also include those tickets for equipment violations, so individuals can go into the police department, and before they had to come down to the courthouse and get verification that they've made that improvement. Now they can stop at the police department, make a copy of that, send that to us online, and we can dismiss that ticket. Yes?
Question for Gary. For the marijuana civil infractions, would you be the person, or would I have to go through the police department to get an idea of how many tickets have been administered and like where they were administered? So what part of the city were they given out?
I certainly cannot break down the part of the city, but I can give you the numbers.
Okay.
And I don't know if the police department has that capability or not. That, as you may recall, when we changed that to a civil infraction from a misdemeanor, our marijuana offenses dropped close to 80%, 85%. And the numbers are down, and I'm thinking 150 to 200 a year, whereas before we were probably looking at anywhere 900 to 1,100 a year. And they were usually secondary offenses. They're usually not primary offenses. So I'm pretty much, honestly, the police department's not wasting their time writing civil infractions, unless it generally might be a secondary offense. So you stop for something else,
right, and
you happen to have more than the allowable amount, and then they're given.
If you can send that my way, I'd appreciate it. The numbers.
I will send that to you.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner?
And I guess correlating to what Commissioner Jones is asking for, is there any, can you also look at other offenses related to marijuana? Has there been an increase in any of the other for over the civil infraction threshold?
So you want the misdemeanors also?
Yeah, just wondering if there's
Yes.
been what the trend lines on those are.
Yep.
Thank you.
We're working with the State Court Administrative Office on an e-filing implementation preparation. The Michigan Supreme Court had a pilot project for 5 to 7 years with 7 courts around the state to look at e-filing. The Supreme Court has decided to do that statewide and put that out to bid. ImageSoft got that bid, and we being the courts in Kent and Muskegon County are the courts after the pilots have been fully implemented to be in the first, what they call the first wave. So our vendors have been in contact with the Supreme Court IT department to look at what it's going to take to implement that here. I've been involved in large state IT projects before, so you know the goal is to have us up and running by the end of next year. I can be very honest with you, that's not going to happen because I've already been in contact with the pilot courts to see where they're at. But it is going to happen. If you're not aware, the state of Illinois has mandated civil filings by e-filing as of January 1st last year. Now, it's not going to be mandated in the state of Michigan initially. I think they'll wait until it's fully implemented in all the courts. But it will have a significant impact, at least with our high volume civil filers, which would be attorney firms, large landlord tenant firms who will take advantage of that, and that will have a significant impact on court operations once it's up and fully operational. I'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah, thank you.
So the public satisfaction survey has begun again today. We're expanding our imaging for record storage. We've expanded now into the probation department. I told my probation department I don't want them to have probation files anymore. They're not required by statute. It's just a lot of additional paperwork and file folders that we have to purchase, and there's no reason that we can't have those imaged. And they started that project about 3 months ago. And Michigan statute now requires that all drug and sobriety courts be certified in the state. We were visited by the state team about a month ago. For you to be able to submit for federal and state grants, it requires your certification. I don't anticipate there'll be any difficulties with that. I just wanted to do some caseload comparisons, and here's a 5-year comparison. I think there's been questions from the commission in the past, how does your caseloads look like? This shows close to a $10,000 caseload decrease, and you see where the most significant decreases happen. If you look at the top 3 categories, civil infraction traffic, misdemeanor traffic, civil infraction traffic statute, went from being 54% of our caseload in 2012 to 45%, and goes to a $9,000 caseload or ticket decrease. Our general civil stayed pretty much the same, although it did increase up to 14% of our caseload. Landlord tenant dropped significantly. As you remember, back in 2012, times were not all that good. Okay, so this is really reflective of the economy. But ironically, if you look at our ordinance statute misdemeanors, that's gone up significantly. Well, I consider it significantly, almost 3,000. And now it went from 12% of our caseload to 21% of our caseload. Felonies have been pretty much the same, and ordinance parking has continued to increase, and I anticipate, as John sends us more cases, will continue to increase.
Gary, can you give us a sense of what's captured under general civil and then the ordinance statute misdemeanor? Do you have a break? I'm
General
curious what
civil is
those
like
are.
small claims.
Okay.
Okay. Anything under 15,000, I want to sue you. It's in the general civil category. Okay.
Okay.
And the ordinance statute misdemeanor are basically those misdemeanors that are committed within the city, and that could be anything from petty theft to it actually assault and battery, resisting and obstructing a police officer are real typical. Urinating in public, all right. A lot of these are repeat offenders, drinking in public parks, okay. So I don't have a specific case type, but I can probably have my IT person do an analysis on that to see what case types have gone up significantly in that time period.
And then do you break down which ones are written under local ordinance versus a state statute?
We can give you that breakdown if you would like. I can tell you that probably out of that 8,800, probably at least 80% of those are ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah. We have very few statute misdemeanors that are written here.
It's mostly local ordinance.
Case flow processing, we processed 40,343 last year. We process all those cases within 126 days, 99.5% of those. That puts us in the top 3 district courts, and actually that's a typo. They're not in 98 district courts in the state of Michigan. Currently, there's 105 district courts in the state of Michigan.
Gary, can I ask a question about that? I was just reading some data from the state about how we document and track closes being disposed of or closed. If a case is closed and then reopened at a later date, is even though it's the same incident, is that counted twice as being closed and then reopened?
Well, if a case is closed, it's closed. I don't know how it's reopened unless it's on appeal. But if it's on appeal, the case stays open.
Okay, all right.
But for example, I'll give you an example on a felony case. We do the preliminary examination, and then that case is then bound over to circuit court. For us, that case is closed. But now it's an open case in circuit court until they have a final determination. But for us, for all intents and purposes, unless it's remanded to us, which is very seldom because the court rule has changed, it's a closed case for us.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. In our probation division, numbers have stayed pretty much the same. Our pre-sentence reports have gone down, and and will continue to go down because we've initiated an initiative to do more instant sentencing, and that's going to be driven by a reduction, as you'll see in the 2019 budget, on layoffs that we've implemented for 2019. I just wanted to give you an update on our ancillary programs, and my definition of ancillary programs are all those programs that are provided by the court that are not mandated by statute. Those include our drug and sobriety courts, which combined are the largest specialty courts in the state of Michigan within any court. Our alternative sentencing programs, which also includes work crew. Our drug lab, we're only one of 2 district courts in the state of Michigan that have their own drug lab. Our community outreach court, our domestic assault response team, and our victim impact panel program. Now for 2017, and I think all of you got an invite, and I think on June 6th, we're going to have our annual advisory committee meeting. I would welcome all of you to attend if possible. I know we have at least 1 or 2 graduates appearing that day. We had 182 admissions, 111 graduates, which is 69% success rate. Expulsions and absconded were 55 and 31%. We issued 23,900 drug tests, 17% positive. Now, when I gave this presentation probably 7 years ago, that positive rate was down around 5 or 6%. And the reason you're seeing a significant increase on those that are testing positive now is the increase of the opioid epidemic and us dealing with the heroin offender who has a much higher recidivism rate as opposed to reoffending. We keep them, okay?
Yeah.
They may have to do a weekend in jail or more community service, but it has shown a significant increase on those that are testing positive while in program. They provided an average of 124 treatment hours, improved education level of 6.33, and improved employment status 40%. Our ending caseload was 150. We also have, at the end of the year, 74 people that were on interlock. These are people that are able to drive now that were not eligible before. And again, we are the highest number in the state of Michigan. I think the closest to us is Kalamazoo that may have 50 on interlock. And 4 years ago, since 2014, we started accepting individuals with co-occurring disorders. We had 48 last year, and since its inception, we've treated 356 people with a 68% average graduation rate, which is a significant. It kind of even surprised me, but to get individuals with co-occurring disorders and be that successful is, I think, attributed to our staff and also the excellent services from Network 180 and Arbor Circle. I'd like to point this out because a big reason that we can do some of these ancillary services because of the grant funds that we go out and seek. Last year on federal funds, we got over $425,000 from Sampson BGA, from the State Court Administrative Office. We got an additional $280,000 from the Office of Community Corrections. We accept their DWI thirds, so as opposed to those people being sent to prison, we'll take them into our sobriety or drug court. We get a grant for those individuals and are paid an individual fee for each one. And for our DART program, we get a state grant of $95,530. I'd like to point out, when I got here, just the second year, we requested close to $225,000 general fund monies just to operate our drug courts. Last year, we only requested $45,000 due to the grant funding that we had.
Gary, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
For some just more detail, going back to the ancillary programs.
Yes.
So the drug and sobriety court and drug lab, community outreach. Do you have a more detailed breakdown of revenue versus expenditures for each of these ancillary programs?
I certainly can provide you that.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
I can tell you that they're all self-sufficient, except for you do provide minimal funding for the domestic assault response team, and like the $45,000 for the drug court, and the only one that is a significant impact on the court is the work crew program.
Great. Yeah, I think it would be helpful just so we can see the amount of funds that are being leveraged to support those programs.
Yeah, they're pretty much self-sufficient. I can tell you the drug lab's self-sufficient. Okay.
Great.
And Mayor?
Alternative sentencing program.
Oh, Commissioner Kelly has a question.
Yeah,
No,
I didn't
please.
want to go too far beyond this. I did have a question because of a concern that I heard from constituents. People are very excited, including all of us around this table, about the eviction court.
Yes.
But apparently there have been some issues in other states around it where because landlords are so incentivized now to raise their rents because the market is so hot, including here in Grand Rapids, there have been issues, we certainly read about it in New York City, where the eviction court has been misused. So I'm sure that's not the case here, and our judges are probably on board or watching out for that, but we don't want evictions to become a tool to raise rent, which is to some degree, that's happened.
I'm not aware that we ran across that, but I'll check with Judge Distel and Judge Faber to, ironically, this program has been all in or all out. We've had some law firms that see that extremely win-win is beneficial, and some landlords, but the other ones don't want to have anything to do with it.
Huh.
So
Interesting.
it's been an interesting venture, but we intend to fully expand that to include all 6 judges sometime by the end of this year.
And I'll be happy to send you the New York Times article that
Yeah, I'd
was
like to see
forwarded
that,
to me.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Alternative sentencing. Now, when I talk about alternative sentencing, everybody thinks about work crew, but it's much more than work crew. I have an alternative sentencing coordinator in the probation department, and he coordinates a lot of things like this, days on electronic monitoring, as opposed to people going to jail. We put monitoring bracelets on them. They have to pay for them, but that provides jail bed savings and the work crew program, but also we have a community service program also. So we work with other community resources, and one of the layoffs will be in the work crew program, so we will be looking at expanding more community resources because I don't know if we're going to be able to meet all the contractual requirements with reduced staffing. This is just some of the stuff that we do. This is blight removal. They're probably out there doing that here today. Now that the weather's gotten a lot better. When the weather's not so good, we do this. Here's some drug lab data, at least from a revenue perspective, Mayor, that you can see. This continues to increase every year. I probably am going to have to come back at some point in time. And currently it's staffed by 1 full-time drug lab manager and 4 part-time lab technicians and 1 contractual part-time lab manager, and he's paid with grant funds. But we may have to expand hours. I mean, there can be on any, like Tuesday will be a high day, and they can run over 400 people through the drug lab on a day like today. So, ironically, the part-time technician positions, we call them our P-techs, okay, are a lot of college students, and they don't last very long. So when we have big turnover, it has had a significant impact on the drug lab.
So Gary, for the family division circuit court now, the drug lab does all those tests.
Well, no. In fact, we do very few. Ironically, most of the circuit judges will tell individuals you have to go out to a private lab and get your testing done. So it's very seldom. As you saw, it was like $85 or something. So one judge may have referred them down to us. They might have wanted an instant test because somebody was in court and they wanted them tested, and we were open that day, so they'll send them down for that.
So this isn't a trend. It's just a phenomenon.
But our biggest users are the Department of Corrections. Their office is right across from the drug lab at 82 Ionia, and they send a lot of people over. We do. We probably, during the course of the year, will provide services for over 35 or 40 courts around the state of Michigan. As you know, we have a lot of colleges here. Kids go home and get in trouble in the summer, and they come back here and they're on probation and they've got a drug test. So those courts will contact us and we'll do drug testing for them.
So that's the catch-all for the outside agencies?
Yes.
Thanks.
And we used to do them, I think, for the taxi vendors here. I still don't know if we're doing that for the city or not, but we were doing that licensing requirement also.
Oh, great. No, we're not anymore.
Community outreach. This is something that Judge Passenger started. Judge Distel has continued every other month. They meet at Mel Trotter, and it's primarily to help individuals, and mostly a lot of homeless individuals that may have warrants out there that are reluctant to come to the court, and we try to resolve those issues for them in a place that's a little more comfortable to deal with. And we work with Dégagé, Mel Trotter, and they coordinate. We don't provide any actual probation services. They provide the casework services. This program costs us nothing other than staff. Domestic assault response program. Commissioner Allen traveled out with, or is familiar with them. This is the largest and the only one of its kind in the state of Michigan. And for last year, I think the thing that I noticed, we did have a slight decrease in victims served, but a 10% increase in personal injury, which I think is significant and something that we're going to have to keep in mind, because a lot of our people are part-time people, although they do work and coordinate directly with the police department.
Gary, I'd like to clarify, I'm familiar with it because I did ride-alongs.
You did a ride-along, and I appreciate it.
For public record, I kind of want to get that out there. And observe them in action and do a great job.
I appreciated your compliment last year, and I took that back to the team. They appreciated it, Commissioner. Thank you. We also are one of the only courts, we're the only game in town, in West Michigan, that provides a victim impact panel. If you get a drunk driving, every judge is going to require you to attend a victim impact panel. We do 23 sessions a year, over 1,500 people attend. Program revenue pretty much pays for my coordinator and the additional overtime that I have to pay to staff that. We get them from Allegan, Ionia, Muskegon, all the surrounding courts send them here. Now for a budget overview, our 2019, this is the revised budget. It's not the one that was in the large budget. This provides for about a $300,000 reduction. As of July 1, we're laying off 2 probation officers and a work crew supervisor. As you can see, the percentages, fees are 14%. And what are fees? That 14% is what we're sending the state of Michigan. So it's counted as a revenue, but it's also counted as expenditure going out. Salaries represent 34%, fringe benefits 22%, and operating expenses 30%. Now, when I talk here and Scott says, what is a state and city revenue? What this is the revenue that's collected on costs and fines. Only costs and fines. It's not revenue that we collect for the drug lab or anything else. This is costs and fines on misdemeanor offenses, or this would be for civil filings. And it just gives you an idea. I think when I first came here, it was more like a 71-29% split. And as the state increases fees for this and that, the last one was for increased filing fees to cover the e-filing project for the state of Michigan, which was additional for every civil filing. Seems that we send the state more money every year, or a bigger percentage of what we collect. And Eric's fully well aware of the MIDC legislation, which would also have us sending some additional fees to the state of Michigan on collections on court-appointed counsel. Just wanted to give you a comparison, a 7-year budget comparison, more so, well, no, more, I was going to say more so for expenditures, but revenue also. And this shows that our expenditures over the last 7 years in comparison to 2012, 2019 would be less than 1% a year. But I also want to point out the revenue would be less than 1% a year. And I can say at this point in time, even though we've implemented some additional initiatives along with a private collection agency, which I think will increase some collections, and the 1 and 2 parkings with the Treasurer's Department, I can honestly say revenue is pretty much stagnated. We're pretty much where we're going to be, and I don't see any significant increases in the future. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's just a realistic matter of life. Our 2017 expenditures, here's a breakdown. Again, that 1.9 or almost 2 million up there is what we sent to the state of Michigan. Salaries represent 33%, fringes 21%, and operating 32%. The only thing I would say in comparison to 2019, operating expenses only represent 30%, so we reduced from 17 to 19, 2% of those. And here's a breakdown on our state and city revenue. And revenues by category. This is our revenue projections for this year. Actually, our revenue has been coming in much better the last 2 months, because I thought I was going to have to come back to you and ask you for more money. But it looks like at this point in time, in terms of working with Keith and the budget department, that we're going to come in under budget this year. Here's the district court fund statement. I think you've all been provided that previously. I would just note that for the proposed 2019 budget with those layoffs, that we project to be on the plus side of a little over $100,000 for 2019, and it's projected out to stay at least positive until 2023. And it has had some impact on the general fund subsidy on this year and going out. I always like to show you this, but you just say, what's that state of Michigan revenue? This is what it is. This is a list of all the funds that we collect for the state of Michigan that we submit to them on a monthly basis. Looking ahead, I already talked about the SAO e-filing initiative. I'd like to explain a little bit more about the Michigan Indigent Defense Fund or program, because that's going to affect the city more so than it's going to impact the Corps. It's going to impact us operationally, but what it's going to do is going to shift funding that you previously gave to the court, and it's going to shift that money to the city ultimately. The initial implementation is going to require we provide defendants at first appearance court-appointed attorneys. Now you have to understand, we do video arraignments every morning and every afternoon. We're one of the few. I mean, by way of example, Kentwood does them twice a week. Okay, we do them 10 times a week. So anyone that's arrested, for example, over the weekend, they're going to appear this morning on video if they didn't bond out. If it's the first time they've offended, then the Supreme Court's statute says we have to give them an attorney at that first appearance. So logistically, that was a nightmare for us. We worked with the city to develop a plan. We're going to have 2 attorneys out at the jail. We're going to have an attorney at the courthouse, because we also take walk-ins. Someone's got a bench warrant out, they didn't appear at the first appearance, they can walk in. We'll send them up to see a judge. They're going to have an attorney with them. Previously, we didn't. We advised them of their rights, we set bond, and we always appointed an attorney at the time of video. And 90% of the people will bond out and appear at a pretrial conference. Now, we're going to require to provide that counsel at first appearance. But actually, the city is going to be required. The legislation requires the city maintain and operate that program. So we put together a request with grant funding to hopefully be able to do that. It's supposed to be funded 100%. I see Eric smiling over there. But the next phase is going to take the judiciary completely out of court-appointed counsel. Each one of our judges have anywhere between 8 attorneys assigned to each judge. When anyone needs an attorney, we appoint them and we rotate them depending on what judge is assigned. Then every year or annually, they switch and they move to another judge. They don't want the judiciary doing that, and the next set of standards that will be coming out next year is going to say that the funding unit should take over that operation as well. That's a fairly complex operation. They also want to fund it not only totally with state funds, but they also want to recoup some of the money that we collect, that people reimburse us for their attorneys. We assess $150 flat fee for everyone that gets an attorney. That 20% of that is going to go back to the state to help them fund the program. So that's just a heads up. Eric's well aware of it. He's been on top of the legislation. We've talked back and forth, and I'm sure we'll have more interesting conversations. You've got anything more to add, Eric, on that?
We've met directly with Representative Hewland to try to improve the budget recommendation that came out the first time, which would have had us, instead of getting paid 100% back for doing this, would have had I think essentially a head tax that would have paid for this, that would have been assessed to every community. We would have ended up, I think Jeff's number was like 1.5 million would have been our cost, and the whole cost of our current indigent defense plan is how much, Gary?
Yeah, a lot less than that.
Yeah, so we would have been essentially subsidizing other indigent defense across the state. So we didn't think that was fair, and so we have a better, I think there's going to be a better amount included in the appropriations bill, and it won't be this plan. So I think the way it worked, Jeff, we were at almost 100% reimbursement, if I recall the discussion correctly. So so I think we're in a better shape than we were, but these are only the first 4 standards, and
right.
there are many more standards to be developed.
Yeah,
so
the next one's going to add additional 3 standards are coming this year.
Yeah, we just started the journey.
Yeah, no, and Gary had it right. Right now, we had to subtract our current local share from the amount of the grant request, and now the state's going to require us to submit 20% of that local share. So around $36,000 I think it is for the city, or for the court, under the current proposal.
Yeah.
which is better than 1.5 million.
Yeah, and Michigan Municipal League has been actively working on this as well. I mean, we're not the only city really unhappy with that original recommendation.
Right.
And I think this is exactly why we supported that state court funding recommendation group, because we know that there are some significant issues around court funding statewide.
Yep. Yeah, the big, how much local funding should be involved in the justice system is the major question. So, what kind of outcomes do we want to invest in on a statewide level? So those are questions that the commission's going to be dealing with.
Additionally, we're going to keep on expanding our implementation of imaging. Collection recovery services initiative will be beginning, like I said, next month. Eric is on the commission that's looking at state court funding recommendations. And, we're looking forward to see what recommendations come out or are forthcoming from there. And we've resurrected the city court liaison committee. It's my understanding that there was one about 10 years ago, and it kind of went by the wayside. And we've been in contact with Eric, and I think there are a couple commissioners, there are 3 commissioners that are on that committee, and we'll be meeting at least on a quarterly basis to apprise the city of where the court's at regarding any initiatives and to cooperatively work on future projects. So with that, I'm open to any questions.
I have a question, then I'll turn to my colleagues. So on the fund statement, and maybe this is a better question for Eric or Jeff. So the other services and charges, that is the general fund subsidy line?
Yes, and if you look below to the very bottom of the statement, you can see how much of that is capital reserve and how much of it is general fund subsidy. So our general fund subsidy for fiscal 19 is $5.565 million down at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you can see that it, even with the measures that the court took to hit their target this year, you can see that the subsidy will continue to grow until it gets to $6.89 million within this planning period.
So there's funds that allocate, so it's actually to general fund and capital reserve, so total is $7 million.
Yeah. Yes, the capital reserve is our obligation for the shared court building that we have. So, and when does that bond issue expire? Do we? 2026.
2026.
So eventually we'll not have that. So there will be an ongoing charge for operations and maintenance, but the capital portion will disappear.
Okay. Commissioners, questions?
Yeah, I do.
Commissioner?
If we go back to the increased court cost fees, how is that related, or is it related then to the other bullet point, reviewing alternatives to the Supreme Court, so, conversations around pay directives and court rules, and how we're going to assess people's ability to pay? Are we going to have some relief in some way? Because I know you're caught between a rock and a hard place here. You've got increased
Well, we
costs.
are. I mean, especially the judges are between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
I mean, if you bring an individual in for a show of cause for failure to pay, you can't give them jail time anymore. I mean, you have to actually make a determination on ability to pay. And in fact, the proposed legislation on indigent defense now says that first-time offenders, we're going to have to make a determination on whether someone can partially reimburse us for court-appointed attorney fees, which is really impractical. The judge doesn't have time. Our judge this morning, probably on video arraignments, probably had at least 55 to 60 people to arraign this morning, and they don't have time to look if people are indigent or not and make a determination. We err on the other side, and we appoint counsel for everyone, assuming indigency, but then we also order reimbursement of $150, which is what we pay attorneys for a case. And that probably is suitable for at least 90% of the defendants, and if they can show later that they can't afford it, then we waive it.
Yeah.
But on this whole ability to pay initiative and bond initiative is going to have significant impact on courts nationwide. I mean, it's a nationwide initiative, but it is really being pushed by the Michigan Supreme Court. So we just have to come up with some more innovative ways, and
Yeah.
we're working on that. That's all I can say. I don't have a really good answer for that, Commissioner.
Yeah, well, certainly we'll be partners in that effort. Yeah.
And I'm assuming our city attorney is actively engaged in that conversation.
Pardon?
And is our city attorney's office involved with that conversation? Do you know?
don't
I
know.
doubt on the collection side, Mayor.
Okay. Okay. All right, other questions, commissioners?
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, so next up, we have design and development.
All right.
Suzanne Schultz.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. We're going to talk about the Design and Development Department budget, notably more the Planning Department side of it than the Development side, but we do have some information about the Development Center in here. Just to remind you, the Planning Department functions are wide and varied. Everything from Historic Preservation Commission, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, to development reviews, LUDS permits, sign permits, enforcement that goes along with that, long-range planning, and then kind of just policy development over time. So you're going to hear about 5 components of our budget and of the work that we do. First is development review. Second is going to be talking about the master plan, special land use fees, one component of enforcement, and then process improvement that we've been undergoing. The first slide is about the Planning Department budget and the workload that we have just for the development review component of it. So if you look at development reviews, you can just look at the chart to see that it's been going up pretty dramatically. In the past 5 years, we've seen a 42% increase in the number of LUDs and zoning permits that we've been handing out. Of those, only 8% ever go to a board and commission. 92% of everything that we handle is administrative, and that is a huge customer service to the development community. It helps streamline things and provides a predictable and consistent process for the community. Over time, though, one of the challenges as we've had this huge increase in permitting, we've had to kind of MacGyver solutions to come up with staff and figure out how to juggle staff resources. And one of those was an OA4 that we had, Mary Zart, who was on staff for years, was able to take on some of the lighter planning functions. She recently retired, and so as a result, we've had a gap in service for some of those other things as we've had to allocate planner resources to fill that gap with her retirement. And then also, we've also seen a reduction of about 2/3 of an FTE allocated from development review towards long-range planning and policy development when we consider the policy work for the Housing Now, the equity work around Southtown, South Division, Heartside, and Age Friendly, and then the community organizing and engagement work, for example, with the UCC that we've done, or even medical marijuana, that those components have driven staff time away from development review. So all total, we found ourselves really down 1 FTE between the OA4 retirement and the shift in the demands of the long-range work that we've been doing. The consequence of that is that we've seen plan review timeliness falling down to where almost 1/3 of the time we're the last one to do reviews. We are late on reviews. The Chamber of Commerce noted it in their 2017 Ease of Doing Business report. And when you have a planning supervisor who does over 980 reviews in 12 months, you can understand the workload that's involved and the pace of development and the amount of time dedicated to make sure that we're doing things well. It makes it a challenge to keep up. And we don't have a deep bench. So I did provide you with the org chart of the Planning Department as a handout in front of you. And so again, how do we juggle staff resources in a way that we're meeting the needs of our customers and doing it in a consistent and quick pace, but also doing it correctly, and so that the community can rely on what we're doing and the functions that we're performing, that we're doing it the way we should be doing it. The challenge becomes with this cascading effect of the planning director. So I've been more busy with long-range planning work, which affects Kristen Turkle's work as assistant planning director to help with development reviews. So she's in more developer meetings than before, which affects the plan reviewer and planners and how they do their work. So the challenge is kind of how do we make all those pieces work. We have had also, with some reorganization in community engagement division, is shifting over to communications, and that's 2 FTEs. And they have been able to supplement at times the work of the long-range planning pieces that we need over time, but that's not always necessarily the case. I think it'll be more of a challenge with it shifting.
Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
before you go on, the third bullet, I didn't want to gloss over that. What I'm hearing from the community is one of the biggest frustrations that builders and developers are having is the backlog of LUDs. That
Yep.
really seems to be a sticking point to getting stuff done. So just to advocate for what you're saying, that's what I'm hearing quite loudly is the whole LUDs process, both the permitting, the review, and then the enforcement as it goes forward is a real, it's becoming quite a problem.
That is correct. And we acknowledge that. I mean, that's why Lou does those, I mean, the dashboards that we do, I mean, that's the data that we're providing to you is to show we're aware of it, we track it. Sometimes if we think it's a temporary situation, for example, if we have somebody who's gone out for a medical reason and they're gone for a couple of months, or we know that there's some adjustments that are going to be made that we're going to be able to get out of it at some point. With this and the trends that we've had, and we're not going to be able to get out of it by doing it continuous adjustments. I mean, this is what it is. So the recommendation in the budget is to add 1 FTE for development review. This would be a planner 1 position, is shown in the bottom left-hand corner of the org chart. And this person would help with doing that, provide that backup, provide assistance to planners. The counter work, we'll have planners that'll be up at the counter all day long with citizen questions of, you know, I want to build my garage, I want to build a deck, you know, all those the questions that we regularly come through. So I did include as a handout the analysis of our thinking process and justification for that position. And as I mentioned, the manager has approved that in the budget, and it is included as a staff position for 1 FTE towards development review.
Suzanne, I have a question about the org chart, and maybe this is for Eric. Is this the organizational chart being proposed, or this is the one from January, and are there going to be additional changes? And then also, is there a plan to rename the department and put planning back in the title? Does it design development and planning department instead of community engagement, since that's going to be shifted? Or at least
That's a good point.
tentatively? I think it's very confusing.
Sure. So this is I think all Suzanne has done is take the existing org chart and add the planner 1 to the bottom. So.
And we removed the community engagement, the 2 positions that were there. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not here.
So I see, well, you've still got the graphic illustrator and Courtney Mendez, so the two, the administrative aide and the administrative analyst are gone, right?
Correct.
Okay. So this shows the expected future state with the budget as approved. But your point about the name, I think, is important.
Yeah, I think even when that change was made, I thought some of us around this table thought it was confusing.
Yep.
So.
Suzanne, show on the chart the people who are involved in LUD's review.
So in the chart during LUD's review, so you have Kristen Turkelson, Assistant Planning Director. She assists mostly in problem solving. Planning Supervisor Andy Bowman, his sole function is to review LUDs and building permits. That's all he does. Dale Fitz, Board of Zoning Appeals and counter review, as well as some minor building permit review. Elizabeth Zeller is Planning Commission and the public questions, development or assistance. Landon Bartley, the same as Elizabeth.
So there are other people in the organization, though, that work on LUDs as well, right? So you have...
This is the planning department review for the zoning ordinance pertaining to LUDs, but you have stormwater and other functions that review that permit too.
Right, so any idea off the top of your head how many FTEs are involved in that?
Lou will let you know.
So in ESD, there is one project engineer who is involved in the reviews for stormwater. There's a fractional engineering inspector who does reviews for right-of-way usage as part of LUDs, and then there are 3 LUDs inspectors who are the people who actually go out and check to see that what's being built is consistent with the plans.
Thanks. I just wanted to establish that not everybody who does LUDs is a planner. That there are it's a team sport that others are involved in. So.
But if that's a problem area, will these recommended changes actually meet the needs? Or is the holdup with other departments?
I think we have to analyze is it only volume or is it something else? So, and we haven't done that as part of this process. So the planner one will help with the part that will help with the volume that Suzanne is experiencing and help her with her issue. I'm not sure how much help it will be to LUDs.
We do know that right now the planning department is we're at 30% of the time when there's a late review, it's our fault.
Okay. Lou, do you have anything to add to that? I know you're involved with LUDs.
Yeah, so I focus on like what is the pain point today for that program, and the planning supervisor being the sole reviewer for LUDs is the pain point for LUDs. There are no delays with inspection requests, and those other 2 reviewers I mentioned are consistently caught up. So like this does seem to be the pain point for LUDs.
And then one other question I have as I look at this chart, and commissioners may have others. Am I reading this right, that Mark Fleet oversees all of the inspectors?
Yes. He reports to Suzanne and oversees all the inspectors. He is the senior building official.
Okay.
The next piece I'm going to talk about is the master plan. I do want to identify, though, a gap that's not included in here, and I don't know how we talk about it, but I mentioned that about 2/3 of an FTE has been shifted from the long range or from the development review functions towards more of the policy long range planning functions of the department. And if you think about the policy demands, for example, affordable housing, alcohol, proposed state legislation, marijuana or food trucks, trying to get to those things without dedicated staff is a challenge. That kind of rolls into the master plan discussion when we talk about the future and the purpose of the master plan. Just for the public who might be watching, just a reminder about what the master plan is, as well as an area specific plan. This is a policy document that really drives and serves as the framework for the planning department functions, but certainly I think in regards to a lot of other departments and their work. If we think of Green Grand Rapids, which originated in the planning department but involved Parks and Rec and urban, forestry and streets and lots of other departments, that these have really become seminal documents that we wrap our work around as an organization and really enhances the quality of life for the community and serves as a guide for investment for the future, whether it's our investment in our streets or the public or the private investment in development projects, that we really rely on these documents to tell us and provide guidance for the future. And when we talk about a new master plan, our current master plan was adopted in 2002. We started it in 1999. There is a lot of work that goes into doing a citywide plan effort, as you know. And there's a lot of pre-plan work that goes on that has to to set it up for success. For example, one of the efforts that we're recently doing is, how do you establish your steering committee and what are their priorities? What is the scope of work going to be? What is the budget going to be? What are the things that we want to be mindful of and very intentional about when we create a plan, just to establish some of those foundations or pillars before you even start engaging the public, so that once you hit the ground, you're ready to go. And we know that we want to be very intentional in the community and the discussions that we have this time around. It's a very different discussion than what was had in early 2000s. particularly around equity and who benefits and development without displacement and how do we do this work. We have a lot of amazing work that's been done in the past 20 years around transportation and around buildings. And we really need to focus on the people, and that's a different kind of process, and it takes a different kind of intentionality when we look at framing and structuring this in a way that we find the right consultant team, that we have the right budget, that we can meet communities' expectations, and that we can do it in a very clear, consistent way that has a defined process to it, but also is nimble and flexible enough to respond to what we hear in the community and to provide that feedback and do an iterative process that shows that we're listening and that we're reinforcing what we hear from the community and that we're moving towards something positive and that we're creating that vision and change that the community wants. So there's a lot of pieces that go into it, and I've listed on this thing, on this chart, the very kind of early pieces of it. And I think when we talk about how do we start that master plan process, it does start with some resource discussion, but it also is going to have to involve kind of what does that pre-planning piece look like. We don't just want to jump right into it because I think we miss a lot of opportunities, but we want to be quick about it and get to it as fast as we can. And so when I'm looking from a department manager standpoint on the resources that I have to dedicate towards the process, the chart that's on the lower right-hand corner gives you an idea of the current planning efforts that we are doing. So we have a Heartside plan, which will be done by this fall. South Division, we expect it will be about another 14 months. To complete that. We just had that launch last Sunday, or Sunday before last. Southtown, which is really the staff person who's supporting that work, is now going to be in the Community Engagement Communications Division. And then Age Friendly, which will be done by February. So we're kind of trying to, how do you get all the trains to come in at the same time piece. And for department resources in this budget, we are proposing $50,000 in this fiscal year. This coming fiscal year to go towards that effort, and another 50 in the future. Anticipated budget, just on my guess, is close to $1 million for what we would probably need if we look at past planning efforts. The citywide master plan we did in 2000 was about $650,000. Green Grand Rapids was similar. Michigan Street was more. It was about $900,000, but it involved extensive data modeling for the transportation system. So that's how we have the Ottawa interchange, and some of the modifications that have been made involve that modeling to a totally different level than normally what you would do just for a planning effort. And then we're seeing we have 6 figures both for Southtown and South Division. So I don't think that expectation would be out of line. I don't think it would have to be, it would be more than $1 million, but again, it depends on the scope that we determine, and I think making sure that we finish on time and on budget is critically important. I've never had a project that's gone off budget. So how you scope it is absolutely critical to making sure you stay on that budget. Staff resources, I'd expect some of my time to be in it. We have one planning supervisor on the org chart, that's Courtney Mendez, or Courtney Magaluk. She got married. In there, that would do it. And then right now we have 1 1/4 temp staff, Letitia Lipscomb and one other person involved with contract planner, but those change. We can only keep a contract planner on for 11 months. And according to the hiring rules. So it makes it difficult from a consistency standpoint to have that reliability. So we're really left with one planning supervisor to guide the process, who currently is project managing for South Division and Age Friendly. Are there any questions?
So that $1 million, that includes the current planning efforts that are going on now? Like
no, that's separate from.
It's completely separate from that. Okay.
So I just want to make a comment as I was listening to you talking about how we need to be more people-focused, about an article that I read about artificial intelligence that just struck me this weekend about how we need to, you know, we're in a new era. We've got technology that can help us, artificial intelligence, for example, but that we need to start thinking about our lens that we should look through at these, and I think we're already starting to do it. We just haven't named it. is not thinking so much about process, because that's what machines do, but problem solving, because this is what we're starting to try to do around, whether it's around policing or housing, and it's much more complicated, but it's also much more people focused. And I don't know how we begin to think through that, but I think it's got to be a part of this next planning process, because everything you list here that we're trying to do, it's very nuanced, and it's very difficult to do nuance, as we all know, and you're trying to do it now in so many ways, whether it's around housing, whether it's around evictions, whether it's around hoarding, you name it. We are trying to be more customer friendly and more people focused. So how we look at that, and you're going out to conferences and so on, I just think it's something that we need to be mindful of in terms of how we redo our processes.
We've found it to be a huge challenge, and I think especially in this work that we're doing now, one of the big lessons, and even in the GARE training that we went through, when you talk about cultures, and the Anglo way, you have your growing season, you have this time frame, you have to get it done, versus persons who live closer to the equator, there's a different sense of time, and it's more relationship based. And as we look at how we include people of color who have not traditionally been included in these processes, those personal contacts and those relationships are absolutely critical components to success. And that just takes time. And somebody to have that relationship with, rather than making sausage and putting it through a process. And I think that is probably one of the biggest frustrations in doing some of this work, is the amount of time that you'd want to go have coffee with a steering committee member, or you'd want to go spend time, and it's just not there, is probably one of the biggest challenges with this.
But again, I think about this, and Angelica, who organized 1,000 people.
Yes.
Tapping into that sort of talent, and so there's already that lived experience and that learned experience that we can take advantage of this. I think the piece of what we're trying to figure out how to take advantage of that, how to employ that help.
But to do that took trust. So and now Gail sitting next to Angelica, translating for her at our advisor meetings, and Angelica working enough with Courtney and I to know that what we said is what we're going to do with her. And translating everything into dual languages so that she can read along with other members. I mean, that's the level of effort it takes to do that, to have her confidence and her desire to be engaged.
Thanks, Commissioner.
It would seem to me, in the context of this conversation, something you mentioned earlier just kind of resonated with me, is that from my perspective, your department is being required to do a lot more community engagement than you ever did before. So you're relying on contract staff to do that. Well, based off what you just said, which I totally agree with, it takes a little bit of time to build trust, to build some cohesion. Commissioner Lanier and I have talked about the work that's going on in Southtown. It's been a slow process because there's just lack of trust and lack of a lot of things, and so it would seem to me that if you're stuck with a rule that requires that the contractor that you hire can only be there for 11 months, but the process might take long, and that really flies in the face of authentic community engagement, which takes time to build those relationships. So it's not that I'm trying to add to a budget, but I'm wondering if it would make more sense if those people were actually brought on as staff rather than contract staff, because I guarantee you Southtown's going to take more than 11 months. And then the person who built the relationship, who's doing that, they're gone. Then you're starting back to square one. So just put that out there for what it's worth. It doesn't necessarily require comment, but that's something that strikes me.
So if I could respond to that. So one thing we've done in the past is when we have had like a termed engagement, we've brought staff on for that period of time. So for example, when we did the weatherization and energy improvements project, Selma Tucker was here at that time. So those people knew when we hired them that they were here for 2 years or something like that. And so it's a very termed engagement, but that way we get around the ruling about having seasonal or temporary staff in a position for too long. Could be an option.
Do you have a job description for that contract planner temp staff?
Yes.
For this I would love to see it.
The job description right now we have for the contract planner is more the development review function, but we can give you something.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Other questions, commissioners? All right.
The other piece I want to mention too regarding this, especially when you talk about implementation, so it's going from the master plan into the implementation phase. So we went through the master plan process last time. We did the pattern workbook for neighborhoods and developed the zoning ordinance. I would expect a similar pattern going forward. So I just want to plant that seed so that you're aware. The other piece, just to point out, is that Assistant Planning Director Jay Steffen, you'll notice, is not mentioned on here. He is working full-time on the river. In regards to special land use fees, as we said, only 8% of projects end up going to the Planning Commission. Of those 8%, on the right-hand side, you'll see 31% are actually development review projects. Most of them are uses. So churches, daycares, alcohol uses. Those are almost two-thirds of, well, over two-thirds of what the Planning Commission hears on a regular basis. They don't hear development projects a whole lot. So when we looked at the numbers, what we found is the number of special land use applications for housing development in 2016, there were 12 requests, 12 applications for housing. Of those, 4 were for affordable housing projects. The number of special land use applications for housing development received in 2017 from the development community for more housing was 3. And then so far this year we've had 7 requests, 1 being for an affordable housing project. All the other projects that we review are administratively handled. So just to give you a sense of the numbers of applications that we receive. And then the breakout that's above it in that chart shows the percent, third, 2/3 special land use for the number of housing units. So when we looked at took a look at it, and I know Commissioner Lear wanted to know about application fees. So the proposed budget for this year, the application fee is $2,015. We try to do under full cost recovery and allocation policy, that full cost recovery as best we can. Currently, the general operating fund subsidizes 12% of those of the costs associated with providing special land use review and generally approval. And when we looked at those numbers and how much it would correlate, probably on the low side, depending on if we offer that service for free or no cost, that we may see an increase in the number of applications. So that's somewhat speculative. So we started at the low end for 20,000, high end would be 50,000, depending on what we received. When we looked at the number of those applications, the number of units requested in those applications, the cost works out to about $83 per unit for a residential unit. And now that can vary widely. I mean, we had some pretty large development projects that came through Planning Commission, actually 3 in particular, and that can be very different than an accessory dwelling unit, for example, which is just a 1 unit. So I think you have some variability in how you look at units or applications and whether or not you want to address that. Is this for affordable housing projects or all housing projects that you would want to see that might go in front of the Planning Commission? Does the subsidy go to the department? It's a general operating fund reimbursement, or does it go to the applicant as a reimbursement potentially through the housing fund? And what triggers then, if it's only for affordable housing, what would trigger that? For example, we have incentives and bonuses in the zoning ordinance now worked in for affordable housing. If they met that criteria, then that might be a criteria. If you're only targeting affordable housing, we could rely on in the zoning to provide that reimbursement or acknowledge that cost.
Mayor?
Yeah, Commissioner.
I appreciate that information, Suzanne, because I know it's been asked a couple of times, what that costs and how that relates. But I would point out that, and this is not for this discussion, it's for the discussion on the zoning portions of the housing now, is that the cost from your department for the application is only one piece of the puzzle. The developer also has to expend money for site plan, just initially. I mean, if you're going to get a project going and do an SLU application, this is probably only 25% of the cost. The other 75% is money. So you still have to put, $10,000 to $15,000 in the street with a project that might or might not go forward, so.
And that's a question more of the process.
Yeah,
than it is
absolutely.
the fee.
It's not for this discussion, but again, I know you've been asked this, and I appreciate you presenting it. I just, in the context of this part of the conversation, I did want to mention that this is only a portion of the cost.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, Suzanne, thank you so much for providing this, but I too was going to share the same thing that Commissioner Allen mentioned, that it wasn't just the fees in isolation, but what other requirements are we asking the developers to provide, or what hoops are we asking them to go through in order to get to this point when they have this fee? And then how do we go about adjusting, those requirements in order to, thank you, adjusting those requirements in order to make it feasible for projects to come before the planning department or the planning commission without expending so much, as Commissioner Allen just mentioned.
And I didn't include that in the slide, but in the housing compendium, I provided the list of all of the things that are required submissions. It's listed. About half of the things that are on the list are required to go to the Planning Commission. So we don't require every single item that is listed, and we work with developers on that and homeowners. The tricky part is having enough information to properly vet the request, and the Planning Commission has the ability to grant waivers for some dimensional things, for density, for parking, and so we need enough information to be able to provide all those waivers and to know exactly what the request is, partly so we know the feasibility of the project to begin with, but also so that the applicant doesn't have to come back multiple times. And what we found is that the looser we get, the more problems we end up having with rework, that if they don't have all the information, then they have to come back for another request to waive something else. Mm-hmm. So it's this fine balance of trying to get enough that it's good enough to get the approval, knowing that we'll work it out in LUDs. We'll work out, for example, we don't require a full landscape plan. The Planning Commission doesn't look at that. Staff handles that during LUDs. A lighting plan, the same way, we handle that during LUDs. So a lot of the things that in other communities they would require upfront as part of a submission, there are quite a few components that we defer to LUDs once they know they have their approval. And we do grant conceptual approval to projects. But again, we want enough information to know what are all the things that they need so they only have to come to one meeting. So that's the tricky part. And I would say that staff, I can give you examples of applications, but I think that we walk a pretty decent line. I think probably floor plans would be the bigger question, but the developer needs to go through that anyway to know how many units they're going to get and the cost of it for their performa and whether they even have a project.
Right.
So I think that's the tricky part, and I don't know if Commissioner Allen has having gone through that process, if there's anything you found was unnecessary as part of that process, knowing there's due diligence that has to be involved.
Yeah, because I almost wonder, and this is me and me not knowing the process, I almost wonder if there's a way to have a template of some sort that developers could say, these are the things that I'm planning to do in theory. And then kind of go through an approval process, and then after they've gone through, after they're approved, then start spending the money on the renderings and all of that, because that's where they start, I think, spending a lot of dollars.
Yeah, from my perspective, Commissioner O'Connor, you correct me if I'm wrong, from my perspective, inherent in the word special land use is that it's very specific to that specific site. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of hard to put it through a template because it can vary by a million different factors. So it really is kind of hard to do that. Can I just interrupt, because I know you're a quick thinker.
So it wouldn't necessarily have to be for the major projects, because what we were specifically talking about, the small scale projects that aren't feasible for small scale developers. So if they're building a building like this doesn't apply to them. We're talking about small scale projects.
I would rather say that I think that I would lace it back to, when we talk about process, I would lace it back to the planning department's lack of staff and the building department's lack of staff. So if you go back to this org chart and you've got, the question was asked, does Mark Fleet oversee all those inspectors? The bigger thing that sticks out to me is we really only have a few plan examiners. So sometimes if a builder could just sit down with some concepts and have some time to meet with somebody, but they literally don't have the time to schedule that because they're stacked up 12 deep and they're behind. So it really comes back to the ability to sit down initially with some, and the planning staff's been great when you can do that, but still you have to have something at least concrete for them to say, we've done quite a bit of that.
Well, and for me, I think it just comes back to what constitutes special land use, right? Like, is it really special? And you've done some of that work already, looking at things that get approved every single time. So are they really special? But that creates that context of, you know, the so-called buy right, which makes people nervous. But at the same time, again, if you look at the data she provided, only 8% of the stuff that happens in this town goes to special land use anyway. And if you look at that, I don't know, just if you're building 4-story small mixed-use developments in a neighborhood, is that really outside the box too far? Or do we need to reimagine what that box looks like for small-scale development?
I think the other component to this is the community engagement and the public expectation neighborhood input standpoint is that they do want enough information to know what they're looking at, and that if it's feasible, rather than if a developer comes forward with something, they find it's not feasible, then they come back with something else, then they change because something needs to be reworked again. That creates problems and both for trust, but then also kind of reliability. And so that does become a problem too if the developer hasn't figured out really what they're doing. Then later down the road, it has impacts on the community too.
Architects are like lawyers. Every time you call them, it'll cost you $1,000. So.
and I'm assuming. I'm assuming that this might be part of the discussion for the Housing Now stuff to come. So I don't know if you want additional discussion on the fees and how that works, or we just want to put that there in the interest of time.
Well, I think what you've done for me, and hopefully for us, is help put it in perspective. So 92% of the work kind of gets moves on without having to go through special land use. And then of the special land use stuff, it's a small segment. So we just need to figure out how to handle this small segment in a better way. And I think the Affordable Housing Fund is one way of doing that. If we can't relax or shouldn't relax the cost of getting ready, then perhaps if we want these kinds of investments, that's something that the Affordable Housing Fund could invest in, is helping get those done. So it's, in addition to the fees, help with, sharing pre-development costs or something like that. It's because that really is, it could be a barrier to some projects. So that might be a way.
And if that was a reimbursable expense, it wouldn't necessarily need to include just a special land use fee. It could include development of plans. Sure. If it was a fund reimbursement request to the applicant, just leave the department out of it. but you could include other things which would be beneficial.
And then we've always had this ability for persons to come before a design team to get their project kind of pre-tested a little bit. And developers who do that or investors who do that generally do better, and they generally do it with less cost because they've had the ability to talk to staff to vet out some ideas. And so maybe what we ought to try to do is get more of the affordable housing projects before design team so we can iron out some things ahead of time, potentially. Yep. And design team meets 3 times a month, and there's no cost. So it's and you can get on the agenda by dialing Rick DeVries. So.
Or Emma Ledge.
Or Emma.
Yes.
And I appreciate these questions that you added here for this discussion. I mean, personally, I think that this all came up because of our affordable housing. But I also like your suggestion that maybe it's a reimbursable request and you leave your department out of it. I think that'd be easier for you.
I think it helps you maintain, I think your full cost recovery it was put in place for a reason. Exactly. I mean, that was, and how do you maintain that and keep that intact as much as possible, and where do you grant exceptions? Because, it's not a matter of if, but when we go through another recession, trying to scale these things back and how you look at them, I think making sure that you're clear on its purpose and how it's allocated out, but trying to preserve that policy. I think just from a global budgetary standpoint, having worked with the transformation advisors would be suggested.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, because the fees from your department are kind of insignificant in the grand scheme of some things, right? It's the water and sewer expense, which by statute we can't waive. So it's the reimbursement's really where you can have the biggest impact.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, we've taken care of the water and sewer fees too, because they're now Piquito compared to what they used to be. So.
Right, but I mean, a connection fee for a water service is $10,000.
No, the connection fee is like.
It's a connection fee and a meter fee and a trenching fee and a shut down the streets fee, and by the time you're all said and done, it's $15,000 to get water to a building.
You have construction costs now, but the fee used to be $3,000 or so for each, plus other stuff. So now it's like 500,000. I went the other
Wrong
way.
direction.
Sorry.
The chamber's upset.
Excuse me. I'm your best ambassador. So 500. It's something like $500 all in, $600 all in for both. So it's been reduced significantly.
But I think I agree with you, but similar to the discussion about the application fee, the actual fee for the hookup might be only $500, but you still have to pay other city departments these other dollars. And I'm not saying it's exorbitant, I'm just saying it's not cheap. It's so many feet for your sewer, so many feet for your water, and you gotta pay, and there's the shut off fee for the city, you gotta pay all that. And that's not a bad thing, but the point on that is if that's eliminated and you could save $10,000, that could be passed on to the home buyer, that helps.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Quickly, the last two items I have, one is window safety. We've heard that there's been concerns about enforcement, particularly around windows and how those work. The issues around windows that we have is that we have windows being blocked by signs, coolers, and other objects that reduce the useful function of windows on party stores and similar uses. That could be said for vape shops, for cell phone stores, there's I just drove by, saw more signs in another window at a business. So it's become a significant issue for us. And then also kind of window tintings, coatings, reflectivity of windows. And really they go against crime prevention through environmental design. The purpose of windows provides public safety in an urban environment from natural surveillance that you can see and be seen, and that it is a priority for us. We do have requirements in our zoning ordinance. However, we have a couple issues regarding that. The challenges are the planning department regulates signs, but the neighborhood improvement department, our code compliance, they regulate the zoning pieces of it. So it's clunky as far as if there's coolers in front of the windows, that's not the planning department's function, it's code compliance function. So how do we do that in a different way? And then zoning also gives non-conforming rights. So if a business, a party store, let's say, had window signage and it was up there since the 70s, like they have non-conforming rights because the zoning ordinance changed in 2007. So what we've been talking about both with GRPD as well as code compliance is there a different approach that we can take? Can we think about doing a SEPTED ordinance that is very common in Florida, where we look at crime prevention through environmental design, what makes for a safe environment that allows for natural surveillance, but not through zoning, through some other mechanisms, so that if we have have whatever kind of store it is or whatever kind of issue we've got, that we have those windows that they're protected and that we're increasing surveillance, but maybe there's other functions that go with it. So currently we're in the exploratory stages. We've met once. We had a very brief discussion with GRPD, and then we also met with code compliance last week for a very brief discussion. And everyone seems supportive. We all want to be part of that conversation and how do we do this. So this is just more looking forward, saying to you that, letting you know this is on our radar. But we think it's going to take a different kind of ordinance to do that and to provide, I think, a better, more comprehensive approach that makes more sense than our current practice. And then also, how do we allocate current staff resources? I think there is enough staff resources in this space if we think about some reallocation and some shifting to get a better result with existing resources, but we just need time to figure it out. So I did want to kind of acknowledge that we heard that this was a concern and that we will be working on it.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Suzanne, do we know about how many businesses have been grandfathered in and that are still in business?
I would say probably it's at least 50%. The challenge that we've got is that the research that it takes, there's just a lot, from a zoning, to do anything in zoning when we're looking at uses or signage or anything, you have to know the history of the property. So there's a research component involved on what their rights are, because you're dealing with property rights. If we take it out of that property right discussion and just say this is a public safety ordinance, we don't have to worry about those non-conforming rights, which is why we're interested in that approach and shifting it, because it does take time for the sign inspector to go through and what were they granted before, what were they given permissions for. It's just because we have to honor their rights, but we also are trying to get a good result. So it takes more time than we think it is necessary.
So in other words, if we were to pass such an ordinance, then even those who are grandfathered in would no longer be grandfathered
Correct.
in. And is it possible to, I mean, we've always had this whole issue with partial signs, you know, you can do it just so many inches. Is it possible to just say, you just don't have signs in the windows, period?
You can. I mean, it's up to the commission.
Yes,
If-
okay.
We can regulate time, place, and manner. We cannot regulate content for signs.
Okay.
So you could say we don't want window signage at all as a body if that's what you wanted to do. We have tried to honor, the requirement is 25% of your window can be signage.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, but it's all about how transparent the sign is too. And, you know, it's not just about, just because something's in a window doesn't mean it's ugly.
No.
It's about how it fits within the I mean, I have window signs in my business that we got approved, but they're,
Yeah.
I mean, it communicates information that's pertinent to.
Right, like neon signs.
But
is the one you
they're
have.
not like this.
No, they're not. They're
Where you
What's
can't
on
really
sale?
see
Yeah.
anything.
right. Exactly. No, so I mean, so it's about there is a transparency requirement that I think is you just take that from the zoning code and put that into the SEPTA ordinance, and it's still about how much transparency you have as a percentage of your window space.
Yeah, I'm just thinking percentage.
You can have like
is
one
tricky.
Budweiser sign and not 40 Budweiser signs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just constant monitoring. I mean, as
Yeah.
properties
Yeah.
change ownership, as you know, the store is now, you know, the cell phone store is now required to put these signs by corporate. I mean, it's just this constant education, and I think that's the opportunity there is by doing a SEPTA ordinance is to do that education and awareness of why this is important, and work with business owners, and then have that enforcement ability. So I think there's as we're talking about, we're like trying to figure out what that would be.
Well, and the comments I've heard around the SID tables too is people don't want to complain about their neighbor. They'd like to, but they don't want to actually be the one to pull the trigger and make a phone call. Even though it's anonymous, they just don't want to do it.
And this is one of those areas where kind of the complaint-based enforcement does not work real well.
Yeah. So commissioners, am I hearing support for this approach? Do we want staff to continue to work on this and come back with a recommendation?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then lastly, I'll let Lou talk about innovation and process streamlining. He's amazing, as you know, so he's been doing some really great work, and I want to celebrate it.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Lou.
I did want to offer very briefly a couple comments about the Development Center generally, because we were talking about planning and how that specific discipline has become a bottleneck, but the Development Center actually includes 10 disciplines, and most all of those are working really well. And projects can get on the design team within a couple weeks. People get responses to emails within a few hours. People get inspections within a couple days. So a lot of things are working well. So I don't want to give the impression that that everything's broken. Most things are working pretty well. We are continuing to do some innovative things, some of which you've already heard about and seen on other agendas. So we do have Development Center Advisory Council. We started that I think about 5 years ago, and it is now meeting more frequently. It's meeting quarterly, and it includes representation from the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce, Josh Lunger, who some of you know. And he has been an active participant in those meetings, and now I talk to him on the phone from time to time as well. So, so we have their input. We have an electronic plan review solution, which we've been working on for I think 8 or 9 months. And we have a really incredible vendor we're working with. They had the vision for this solution, which we have presented in concept to our advisory council, and they have basically done anything we've asked in terms of making tweaks to, what things are called, how things work, what the process is, and so I think we're going to have something that's really excellent and kind of cutting edge for this industry in the next few months. So we're testing with some customers in the next few weeks, and we plan to go live with this in July or August. We'll do it when the time is right, but it will be very soon.
You just read my mind. I was going to ask you if there was user testing.
Yes, for sure. And we're going to go through with designers several rounds of how's this going to work. So they submit their thing, we review it. It has a much better way of communicating discrete issues than we've had in the past. In the past, it's been like we send you a big paragraph of stuff. It may be numbered or bulleted, but then you have to kind of tease out if you're the architect how do you respond to this. This will be much more systematic. So we'll go through all of that in detail with some designers, and we've had some designers at the advisory council give us very positive feedback already, but they haven't kind of been hands-on with it, so they'll have the opportunity to do that.
Great.
In terms of website resources, and I know Commissioner Lanier, this isn't quite what you had in mind with templates, but it's kind of moving in that direction where we came up with, as part of the Redevelopment Ready Communities certification process, which is a journey you set us on, we came up with this idea of a process generator. So we ask you 10 questions about your project, and then we provide, and so that's what's on the left, please answer these questions. And then we provide, in a totally dynamic way, based on their responses, these are the processes that you have to follow. You might only have to follow one or two, or you might have the full treatment if it's something really big. But it lowers the barrier in terms of people who don't do business with us often, or might be newer to development center processes. It sort of lowers that knowledge barrier and makes us more accessible. This is another thing that the Chamber of Commerce, when we met with them 6 months or so ago, that they wanted us to focus on how do you make it easy for people who aren't already in. And this is a way of doing that. Inspection consistency, we hear about this often. Inspector A came out and he identified this thing, and when I had Inspector B come out on a similar job 6 months ago, it was a similar thing and they didn't call it out. We're working on it, which isn't a totally satisfying statement. I think it's getting better. These trade teams, so each of these inspection disciplines, they meet regularly, monthly or bi-monthly, and this is really their focus, is kind of exploring these difficult situations and what do we do. And the challenge is they are different people, with slightly different approaches in terms of their personal style. And also, often those situations, situation A and B, they're not as alike as we might have thought they were when we were kind of looking at them from 1,000 feet instead of 100 feet. So we're working on it. I expect this is one of those things that is never going to disappear, but we're trying to make it as good as we possibly can. 311 scheduling, we're transitioning. We're about halfway through the transition, maybe a bit more than that, to getting all of our disciplines to schedule through 311. The idea here is just to have the inspectors spending as much of their valuable time as they can in the field rather than on the phone. And then our department, and this is where we've been, the two I'm highlighting here are actually working with City Clerk Hondorp and his team, but our department does get involved in some citywide innovations, and one of those that I think is of interest to you is we are working with the City Clerk's office on some licensing related streamlining and initiatives. So that's a multi-month process. It's probably not something that there will be highly visible benefits from for about a year, but licensing will look different. And then also working with the City Clerk's office, we are leveraging the legislative management tool set to do electronic contract routing. And so you have an example there. And Mr. City Clerk, I'm sorry it's not your name. This is one that's a month old, but this has been working well. I've been using it. I think there are 3 or 4 departments that are the big contract routing departments that have transitioned to this, and mine was done in 2 days, which I thought was pretty pretty good. So some performance improvements there. Do you have any questions for me?
All right, commissioners, questions for Lou?
Just a comment, Lou, could, your comments about how we hear that there isn't consistency, and yet we're very well aware that every problem is different, and so it really kind of boils down to customer service and how people are feeling. We're trying to get to yes whenever possible, and I think that's what you're doing here, and so kudos to you. You're speeding up the time, the processes are going to be more streamlined, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to say the same thing, and I think, and then providing a higher level of customer service. I think people are expecting to kind of know what's expected of them, and to communicate that in advance, I think is very helpful. So thank you for this work.
Yeah, and the new website has been a good platform for that. Some of these things we'd wanted to do for a while, but we had to wait till the capabilities were there. Thank you, Commissioner.
And I will add my thanks. There are lots of things I appreciate about you, Lou, but I really appreciate that you see a problem and you work to resolve it, and you don't wait around for somebody. You are just very much always looking at ways to improve and serve our community better, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Keep at it.
All right, so Commission, I think we're done with that portion. A couple things. Lunch is here in 9:01, so why don't we just take like a 15-minute break, grab something to eat, because we still have 4 other items, and I have a hard stop at 2, so if we go a little bit over, I'm going to turn this microphone over to our president of the commission, Commissioner Lanier. But why don't we go ahead and take a 15-minute break and then meet back in here just after 1 o'clock for the revised general fund statement.
Mayor, just so you know, I'm also a hard stop at 2.
Okay.
and then not approved, so we removed that. We did add the 1 million in community and police relations into FY 2023. That was not in the original preliminary fiscal plan. And then we added 100,000 in all years for experienced GR additional supplement. We updated the maintenance of effort for the new numbers, and then we're going to propose a transfer to the budget stabilization fund this year yet to $1,350,000 from 600,000, and that's to move it to 10% guideline at the end of FY19. And then we obviously had to update the 20% surplus numbers at the bottom of the statement. So those were the changes so far, and you can see here. Hopefully, read this. So this is projecting just over $640,000 surplus in 19. Just under 300,000 in FY20, and then you can see the deficits in the 3 out years. So those were the changes we've made so far. Any questions?
Jeff, I have a question, and I know this isn't finalized in Lansing yet, but do these numbers incorporate any of the potential changes in Lansing with fire protection grants or PPT reimbursement?
I do not. No. Nope.
So if those, based on whatever gets approved at Lansing, potentially these numbers will be revised?
Correct. I don't know if it'll be done on time for final, but yes, depending on how long that takes, yeah.
Okay. But those wouldn't kick in till October, right? Because it's an October 1
I think
budget.
so, yeah, correct.
All right, commissioners, other questions?
So the one I think we haven't talked much about is the budget stabilization fund. So that would be maybe new to everybody today. So the idea here is to get back to 10% policy level, and we have good net earnings this year, and it would seem prudent to replace that.
Actually, we would be using this based on last year's net earnings because this year's not closed out, and you can only do it in a year that closes with a surplus. And I believe we have about 2.2 million available from last year's surplus. And you can see we'd be $1,375,000 in this proposal. So.
And Jeff, remind me, I feel like we had that conversation at the December retreat where the commission said, yes, we want to make sure that we meet those goals, especially
so, yeah.
to prepare for a potential economic downturn.
Correct.
All right, commissioners, questions about that?
So Jeff, flip up to the budget stabilization fund.
Oh, it's right here, sorry. So you can see it would be just under 14.3 million at the end of 19, but right at 10% of GOF expenditures, and slightly declining, but still over 9% through the forecast years here.
All right. Commissioners, questions?
Hopefully we'll get back up to 10%.
Yeah. Again, can someone text Commissioner Schaefer? Be very happy. We are all very happy, but I feel like Commissioner Schaefer for 8 years talked about this.
I wanted to rename this fund statement to Mr. Schaefer.
I know, because this was his one priority every single year that we spend a lot of time on. So, all right, commissioners, anything else on that? All right, then let's talk about affordable housing, and we have Carlos here with us today. So Eric, you want Carlos to take this way, or are you going to talk about this first?
Well, what we are showing here is the fund and trying to demonstrate what we are going to do this year. So Carlos can talk about the status of putting together the fund board and where we are with that, and then we'll get into the financials.
All right, sounds good. Carlos, welcome.
When we met, we threw some names out. I did circle back. Pat Lonergan from Fifth Third has agreed to serve. I got
Carlos, let me back up a little bit, since only some of us were in that meeting. So, commissioners, if you remember last time Carlos was here, after that, at that meeting we decided we would get together and talk just to flush out some of the details about putting together the fund, but also the board, because we know that we need to get that off the ground, bylaws in place, all of that. There's a lot of initial work that needs to be done. If you remember correctly, the board is made up of 9 individuals, 4 appointed by the Housing Commission, 4 appointed by this body, and then 1 joint member. And so some of you have given me feedback on who you thought were good potential applicants. I emailed back those of you who got together with me, then Commissioner Kelly being the chair of the appointments committee. We talked about some ideas after we met with Carlos and are following up on those recommendations, and we're hoping to have that finalized within the next week or so, hopefully.
Right. But I think we ought to have an opportunity to share with the other commissioners. We'll have to talk to, maybe after this meeting, we can talk about that.
Yeah, good idea. All right, so that's where we are, and so some of the names that the Housing Commission is exploring, one of them being Pat. So I just wanted to give some background on how we got there.
And we also talked about what the roles of the, not only of the board, but the board is also going to appoint an advisory board. So I got the list from the committee that did the whole Housing Now and advisory committee, so we can tap into a lot of them. So once we get that board, we'll start recruiting folks for the advisory committee as well.
I'm sorry, Carlos, I'll just add one more thing. So with the advisory committee, that's a really important committee. And we talked about wanting to make sure that there weren't individuals on the housing fund board that potentially could have a conflict. So we talked about that, knowing that we want nonprofit developer, for-profit developer, neighborhoods, but also residents who've had lived experience actively engaged. And so that's where that advisory council will be really critical to make sure that we have a really diverse group of voices around that table. Go ahead.
So we have, like I said, Pat Lonergan had agreed to serve on it, which will be helpful because of his Fifth Third connection, and he's the community connection to the bank. So he was real enthusiastic about being a part of this. We're still trying to recruit Mary Jo Pulte. She's a maybe. And she has her own foundation as well, but comes from the Pulte family that does a lot of home ownership building. And then we have Monica Steinley has agreed, and Betty Zalstra, and she might be interested in chairing if that's who you want to do that. So we're real close to getting ours, and then I guess you guys have your 4 that you're working on. And you plan on doing that, what, in the next couple of weeks?
Hopefully in the next week.
We've reached out to a number of people, and we're waiting to hear back. We've got a couple of yeses, and it looks like Ryan Kilpatrick is willing to serve. He's already working in Ottawa County, and we're really trying to move the needle on the whole regional piece. And we had one no, and so we're pursuing others. So open to any suggestions that commissioners around this table would have. I think Lee Weber is interested, and she's got that connection to foundations, which will be very important. I was considering Doretha Ardone because of her work with Fair Housing. She's got a background in real estate, and she also has worked through Link to prepare people for purchasing housing. And she's also had some lived experience. So we've got then one more seat after that, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, we talked about having someone from a large employer like Spectrum as they wrestle with having housing for their employees, and with them being one of the largest employers in the city, we thought that voice may be really critical. So Commissioner Jones was following up on a potential recommendation from Spectrum. So once we kind of have our slate together, we will send that out to the full commission and then have it vetted through the appointments process. And then we need to think about what we want to do for the joint appointee and who we think that should be.
Yeah, once we get at least the majority of them appointed, we can at least start meeting. We need the names to be able to file for the 501c3. Everything else is filed, but we'll need the names. So the commission will be making its appointment at its June meeting as well. So hopefully this summer we might be able to start engaging the folks and moving along on that.
Well, and go ahead, Commissioner.
Just a quick question. I know we had talked briefly about the possibility of a commissioner from this body serving on the board as well, and I see Monica's going to serve from the Housing Commission, so I think that's good.
We did talk about that, Commissioner Kelly.
No, I just You're looking at me, I'm sure.
She recommended you
It's
too.
true,
I
I'm willing, at the same time, I really think that this needs to be community-owned and led. And one of the concerns that I got back in terms of feedback about our own board was that when we report it out, we really need to have the community reporting to us and making those recommendations. So we can, through our appointments, have our voice heard. But there's going to be a level of expertise that needs to be around that table in terms of all those places. That's why we're really thinking about a large employer, somebody with the Community Reinvestment Act background. That would be Pat. Very interested in Ryan because he has worked through MEDC and now he's doing housing in Ottawa County and he lives here. And we want to, move that needle around getting our county involved if at all possible. And I think that I'm excited about the possibilities because of Wayman Britt being in that seat right now. And I know you're working on housing in lead with the county commissioner. So as much as I would enjoy it, I mean, I've been tracking this, working on this since I got here, and you and I had those early conversations with Mayor Hartwell, warning us about how difficult this is going to be. But at the same time, I just want to make sure that there's people around that table who are going to get the job done and have that background. So,
that's an interesting thought, is having the joint person be somebody from the county.
And even as we recruit people, I tell them that there's basically two opportunities. If they can't serve on the board, we certainly could use them on the advisory committee. So maybe we can twist Ruth, Commissioner Kelly, to serve on the advisory committee and help us keep that ball rolling on that.
Yeah, because I think the integrity of the fund and helping people to understand the history behind it will be really, really important at this stage. And then I think it's okay to kind of, maybe not have a commissioner. So I wouldn't put it in writing that it will always be a commissioner, but I think it's important because of that history. I think is just important, simply put.
And maybe that is something to think about, even it being like a short, like the first year until some of those nuts and bolts are worked out. I mean, I remember when I was first on the land bank, and we had a lot of critical decisions to make on the front end as we figured out the structure of the organization. Commissioner.
So, because my time here is short, I've refrained from making any comments or any suggestions about who serves on that committee. But I would like to offer this, and it relates to a conversation that Eric and Kara and Jono and I had just prior to this meeting, is that what this Affordable Housing Fund is intended to do is something outside the box. It's something different than the traditional programs that are there. I just want to offer a very strong caution, or a very strong informative, just from my experience. So we've tried some things between the land bank and the city to create affordable housing in some unique ways that weren't done before, and one of the quickest ways to bog this down is to try and take traditional housing requirements and methods and place it into this fund. And I'll give you a kind of a concrete example. So, Connie and her staff do an amazing job, but try and meet a HUD audit one time. It's cumbersome, the amount of red tape, the amount of work put on the developer to meet the requirements that the HUD requirements, and Carlos, you know that full well, is that if this fund decides to put together some type of funding availability, if they place all kinds of red tape layers on it, you're basically going to defeat the whole purpose of the fund. It needs to be mobile. So I like the names that I'm hearing, but I think what I'd like to emphasize is that the people who are on it are able to think outside the box to get services to deliver to the populations that need it the most quickly. That's really strongly what I think I would like to caution. So Betty Zylstra is an example. She's worked for eons in the field of homelessness and works with HUD. And if I would, I'm not saying Betty's a bad choice, but as an example, that's where she's lived. That's what she's done. And so I would just caution that group, that board, to really, and how you start is how you finish.
Yeah.
So those early decisions are going to be critical.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder
I
if
think
you want.
when we have our first meeting, Commissioner Kelly might come to them, because as they start talking about the use of those funds, I want to be, some of them might have not been, Betty and Monica were part of the discussion, but to get everybody up to speed on all the discussions you've been having here about the use of those funds, because I heard some earlier today, we may not know all that. So how do we filter that information to the board and continue to get the advisory board to keep looking in the community and see what are the unique ways that we can use those funds to tackle affordable housing.
All right, and I think this is going to also be part of the conversation around the aging in place, because we've got a burgeoning citizen or senior citizen population, and there are huge housing needs there. So I'm excited that we're getting close. It's we're venturing into some new territory here, so we'll talk.
Yeah, well, and I think that's good input from Commissioner Allen too, and I don't know. Again, we want to respect the 4 spots that the Housing Commission has, but I do wonder if you want, you only have 5 board members, and I wonder if you want 2 out of the 5 serving on the Housing Fund.
Yeah, at this point, I know they both are really excited about being, and I mentioned that maybe one of them could serve on the advisory board. We'll try to iron that out in June, see if we can get one at least to serve on the advisory board and the other one to serve on the board.
Okay.
But if you have extra names and stuff that we could consider, you can send them to me.
Yeah. We absolutely will. And so, Commissioners, the hope is that we get this structured and in place so that we can move forward with the final pieces of getting the organization in place. And then I think we can talk about reporting back to make sure that we're in the loop about the work that's being done and the progress being made. And then we can also provide some insight on other experiences that we had, maybe working with a new organization. I know even with the land bank, we had a couple, 4-hour strategic planning processes that moved that work forward pretty quickly. Yeah, so we want to be mindful and thoughtful and respectful of the people's time as well. But we also know that there's an urgency to get moving on this. So
the one thing that we talked about, Detroit, the city of Detroit had set up a fund. I did get a hold of my counterparts from the Detroit Housing Commission there, and it was interesting. She wrote back that we're further along than they are in terms of the structure. They're going to use private donations and stuff. I don't know if they have it set up, but she wanted me to send her stuff, how we set it up. And I said only if you tell me how you got the 25 million. So
how do they get all that attention?
So just thought I'd let you know.
But to that point, we need to continue those conversations, because together we can work on making this a priority at the state level.
Right.
Yeah.
But I just want to reiterate too that we're talking about putting experts on this board, but we've heard loud and clear that somebody who's been affected by a housing challenge needs to sit around that table so they can raise their hand and be like, yeah, that's a great idea, but it ain't gonna work for my community. And so I think that it's really important that how you start is how you finish. You only have a chance to set up a board one time. The advisory board will give another opportunity for that, but I also think that at the top level board, I think it's super important.
Yeah. So I think that's another expert.
Right, exactly, a different kind of expertise.
Yeah, we listed out all the components that should be at the advisory board level, and tenant clients was one of them that we need their voice there. We have a resident advisory board that also we tap into from all our different programs, and that's how we find out if our programs are working or what kind of services we can provide. So we can tap into them as well.
Great.
Yeah, great. All right, Commissioners, other questions?
Carlos, before you leave, if you could advance the slides a couple.
Just real quick, as Carlos.
Oh, yeah,
You want me to do this?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
One last
Allen.
quick comment
You're okay
as
if
Carlos
you'd
is
like.
walking away.
Which one?
Asante will do it. Thank you.
In my opinion, the best way to take advantage of an advisory council is make it a policy of the board that certain programs, certain funding recommendations cannot be approved by the board unless they're vetted by the advisory council. That's the way we operate. So I can't bring a budget to my board unless my advisory, because they're the experts in the field. So the board recognizes that. So the board's really good on policy and procedure, but understands that they need the experts in the field to really dig in. And actually, my advisory council meetings are more strenuous on me than my board meetings. Don't do nothing about that, Rosalind.
Let me.
That's just another word of advice for somebody that works closely with both.
Yeah. Well, and what we did with the land bank is that we included all of the advisory committee members in our strategic planning process. And I think that's a really good practice as well. So.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Carlos. And Carlos has been a really good partner working in this space, and really appreciate his help. And the next piece here is the general fund contribution. So this will be the first year where we'll be able to make an investment from the general fund into the Affordable Housing Community Fund. And you can see that this year for 2018, where the policy is it's 20% of the net earnings of the general fund. So we're estimating those to be $590,000. So it would be the 20% number for this year, and you can see that highlighted in yellow there. And then in the next year we have another amount estimated, and then another amount estimated in fiscal 20. Those total about $775,000 over those 3 years of investment, which is a good start. And so the out years depends on how well we do with our budget. So we have to generate net earnings in order to make a investment. And in those 3 years, we're not recommending, or we're not seeing net earnings. So we have to, if we do, we can make an additional investment. Then Asante, if you could advance the slide one more. So this is a example. It's not in your budget book because we are not going to be having the Affordable Housing Fund on our books. So we'll make investments, it'll go to the Affordable Housing Fund, they'll keep the books, so we'll get a statement from them. This is a sample of kind of working from what we had last year to in the budget book to where we're going now. And you can see under other funding sources, the operating transfer from general fund income tax growth. So we're tracking projects that we've approved that would be eligible for that, and we've estimated an amount that could be made in 19. The next line down is the operating transfer from general operating fund, and that's the 590,609 that was on the prior page, coming from fiscal 18. It's recognized in 19 here in this budget. And then you can see the forecast for fiscal 20 and 21. Then the affordable housing payment funds, these are the pilot fees, and as you recall, the 4 pilots that we approved this year, they all accepted the 2% contribution to the Affordable Housing Community Fund, so we should see some payments from them in the future. So this is just by way of showing you what could happen. I wouldn't, I don't know that we're going to be able to make $750,000 worth of investments in the first year, but we could, and we will have the resources available to do that. So that's why it's important to get the infrastructure established so that we could then make the investments, and we're well on our way to that. So
Commissioner, did you have a question?
No, I'm still thinking about this, some of the comments that Commissioner Allen made in terms of the complicated HUD regs. And one of the reasons we wanted to work with the Housing Commission is all of your years of experience. So it'll be real interesting to see what they're doing in Ottawa County too. I mean, we don't want to be bogged down by that. At the same time, if we have an opportunity to piggyback in some way to make a project go forward, we're still going to have to deal with that. So I think it's going to be a real challenge, and really exciting to see how this all plays out. Glad that you're with us, Housing Commission.
Yeah. Commissioner?
Eric, thank you for providing this budget. For whatever reason, I was under the impression that there would be more money coming into this fund. I don't remember if we talked about an estimate at some point based on previous projects for the last so many years or whatever, but I was expecting there to be more. What am I missing?
Well, so some of the other sources are listed, and I didn't point those out. So private contributions has always been listed as a source. Moving in the one-time dollars from Union Square, FUM and other revenues. So one-time revenues from Union Square, one-time revenues from past MISTA projects, program income from those. So those were always anticipated going into the fund, and they will go into the fund. So that might have been what you were thinking about. And then it really depends on our experience with how we're doing with other mixed-use developments, and and how pilot payments come in. And really the big number, and I think where the real dollars lie, is how can we get private parties to invest in the fund as well?
So, how do we come up with 1% of the pilot project's payments going into this fund? Where did the 1% come from?
It's 2%, I think.
Well, I'm looking at something that says 1 on this sheet here, under 401.
Here.
Where?
They pay a total.
Oh, 61,000. Yep. That's how much goes into. I think it's 1% goes actually to the general fund, and 2% goes to the into this fund. So.
They get a net reduction of 1%.
Right.
Their total cost.
Right.
Say that again?
This is the pilot, and I think that 1% is wrong.
Okay,
It should be 2%.
okay.
So that changes.
That's
changes
future.
the figure then?
I don't know if it gets bigger or not, so we'll have to check.
Well, shouldn't it if we have the projects?
It should get bigger every year because projects, if projects elect to take advantage of the 1%.
If we have more projects every year.
You should be getting more people coming in.
More money, yeah.
So some of these, this was left over from Greg's statement last year. This was kind of the statement he had made up. So some of this is carryover from then. And I don't think the 2% was in there yet last year, so that should be a 2% pilot. But it was also 100% of the current pilot money going into the general fund, I believe. So plus the 2% now on this new formula. So this might not be 100% accurate. I was a little confused on some of the line items, quite frankly. But once we get this all finalized, and again, this is not a fund statement in our books or anything. This is just a projection. So
Right.
Once we have everything finalized, we'll get this more squared away.
So
And Jeff,
can you have a,
oh, no, go ahead.
can you have an updated version of this next week?
Sure.
After you kind of look at.
To the
making
best of my
sure you have-
ability, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I wish I would have pulled this out from last year. I thought we had allocated, kind of set aside funds last year.
We did.
And we did, and that was, I believe, the 420, 659 was an allocation from some other funds we had on hand. Connie might have the
Yeah,
details.
those are
on
the
that,
MISTA
but-
funds that, the program income, and then the 358 was set aside last year as well.
Okay.
So those are both still part of the transaction.
Okay.
And so there will be another line item, I would assume, Jeff, for the 2% pilot here,
Correct.
although we just gotta make a
Correct,
guess.
yes.
Now that we're all confused.
Mhm.
I know.
Yeah.
I was a little
I-
confused on all the sources, quite frankly, from last year, so, yes.
Yeah.
That was.
So I don't know if it would be helpful for me to go back and look at last
We
year's.
can pull it out, but we have it.
Probably not.
It's
Probably best to start
essentially-
from scratch.
Okay.
I would just,
Essentially the same thing.
I would just go forward based upon what you want to do today, so.
Okay. All right. All right, commissioners, other questions about this?
Well, just a quick comment that one of the first premises of this is that once the city can establish a fairly reasonable and reliable amount that we're going to be contributing on an ongoing basis, the thought was what we're seeing nationally with funds like this is anywhere from a 4-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio of private contributions from foundations, which really is not factored in this at all.
Right.
So, if the city can reasonably say we're going to put through various sources 2 million or 1 million a year, that could potentially be 4 million once you work with your local area foundations and philanthropy, so.
Right. And Mayor, I was just gonna add the exact same thing. I turned my microphone on to say that exact thing, that we need to invest as a city
Right.
before we can ask others to invest in what we think is important
Yeah.
to invest in. And so I think, but if it's 100%, which is 3% of pilot, then that says it's a huge investment. That's saying this is what we're planning to contribute. I don't know what those numbers are to know if that's going to be enough or not, but I think we do need to make sure that we are investing as a city into the fund.
Well, so maybe Jeff, go back one slide. That was too many slides.
I didn't touch it.
Yeah, you went forward.
Put that down.
There you go. One more. Is that?
I don't have it.
Okay,
Yeah.
now you know how to do it. Can you back up one more? There you go. All right. So if you see the yellow line on the slide there, slide 56, that's what we're investing from the general fund. So in addition to the whatever comes from the pilot fee, the really big number is the commitment of excess net operating revenues to the fund. That's the really big commitment. Yeah. And so that's another reason why, as we continue to go down the road, we need to continue to transform so we can continue to produce net operating revenues. So we can continue to invest in the Affordable Housing Fund.
Yeah, so those transferred forward to the second line under 695, the operating transfer from general fund. And actually, I believe 100% of Affordable Housing Fund agreements, I think that's the 2%, if I'm thinking correctly. So that line is in there. There was nothing in 19 proposed, because we're not sure when those developments could finish, and I think those are applied when they're finished, correct, the 2%?
Most of the ones that are approved now, they're only applicants. So they could be out 2 years. So.
And I believe the first line is just the GOF pilot payments that they were receiving previously.
So the good news is you're beginning to invest, and you're going to have it's going to be flexible money, and I think this will give the trustees of the Affordable Housing Fund a really good start.
I guess the next big question is, when do we go out? I mean, we got to start thinking about putting together some folks to go out to seek those private contributions.
Yeah, I think the board really needs to be in place, and I mean, if I'm a foundation, I'm not investing unless I know what the organization looks like and their bylaws and their eligibility and what they're spending money on and what the intent is. And I think a lot of that has to be fleshed out.
Plus, I think the request should come from the board, not from us.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Of course, we're happy to provide a letter of support. All right. Thank you, Jeff.
All right. So I want to continue our discussion regarding capital reserve and capital improvement fund.
Eric, were you going to go over what is
Would you rather
this?
do that?
Well, I mean, all of us have this in front of us.
Those are responses to questions. So they're responses to other questions that you have.
So I don't know if we have questions about this information, should we just talk about them next week? I mean, I doubt any of us have had a chance to read this since it just was before us this morning.
I think we can run through what's in there real quick. And then I think it would be good for you to read them and then have more discussion about them next week.
So
if you have questions.
Maybe you can add this to your list, or maybe Jeff, I'll direct this comment to you. So next year when we do the budget, it'd be really helpful to have information that we can read before we come to the budget sessions, so that we have time to digest some things and be prepared. So just as an FYI, put that in your notes for next year.
Well, we'd hope to have time to actually walk you through them today. So
Yeah.
I think we're running out of time. So.
Yeah, I just think, I don't know if other commissioners feel this way, just having all the PowerPoints and the information up here when we start the budget process, like our budget sessions, it's, at least for me, that's how my brain works. I'd like to have them ahead of time just to read them so that I can come in a little more prepared. So.
Okay. Do our best. All right, so you will hold off on talking about those?
Yeah, why don't you start with this additional
Okay.
equity investment first?
So we had a good discussion last week about when we were talking about the capital reserve and the capital improvement fund about equity investments. And so it had a little opportunity to do some thinking, and these are some suggestions. So, and I'm open to other suggestions as we go forward. So the first one has to do with the redevelopment of the MLK Lodge. So the budget as proposed includes $50,000, which is recommended for pre-construction services, which could be a study, could be preliminary engineering, could be whatever we need it to be. And what we've been able to do is find a way to deliver $800,000 in seed capital for the project by piggybacking the $800,000 with the fire station bond issue in fiscal 2021. And so not only would we be doing pre-planning with the stakeholders, we would also have the ability to say we can deliver these dollars at the time of construction. So that would help them with fundraising, I imagine. and would be a investment for us in the MLK Lodge. So that's one. The second one is to use general fund dollars to increase our investment in the Southtown SID or emerging SIDs for either a park acquisition or for SID operational support. And the operational support, I think, is important because the Southtown SID is just emerging and is also looking to do, I think, an innovative facade and economic development investment program that they could use their SID dollars for. And this would help them support that by for paying for any operational support that they would need to, that they would have normally used their SID dollars for. So that's what that is. Then the third one is additional support for capital improvement fund investments to support projects that are happening within the Southtown SID. And so those would be in place of a current project, potentially, that could be made available. And these dollars would be to invest along with projects that are happening in the SID that would be street projects or other projects. That would, and what these dollars would be used for would be to enhance the projects by providing dollars for amenities that normally would come from other sources. This would provide a source for them to be paid for. And this would supplement the amount that's already in the budget, which is the $50,000 for 5 years. That's recommended. And then I think this is it's a big question, and it's an important question, and one we need to do better with over time, that I personally need to do better with. And that well, we got to start this year. I think we can do better, much better. So what I'd like to do is design and implement a process that would identify additional investments on an ongoing basis. And I've received some ideas over the last week. And those ideas we would flesh out using this process and make sure that we were able to get them in the queue for consideration and investment. So that's the beginning of the discussion, and I'm open to suggestions to or changes.
All right, I'll look to Commissioner Allen and Commissioner Lanier. I'm assuming you all met after our last meeting and that you're supportive of these recommendations, or?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Eric, for outlining these recommendations. I think the first thing I'll share is that with the budget already being created, the resources are limited. So the first thing I'd like to do is thank Commissioner Ruppert for his wherewithal to share with the city manager his position on reevaluating some of the investments for the first ward in order to try to look at making things a little bit more equitable across the city. So thank you for that. I don't know if anyone else has done that, but what it does is it provides, if you are willing to do that, it provides the city manager with more resources to then reallocate. Without those, then he's in a position to easily say there aren't any funds available. So I'd actually like to ask all of you, my colleagues, what is your position on where we are based on the exercise that we did when we realized that we had capital improvement projects that were not equitable across the city? And are you willing and interested in reevaluating the capital improvement projects that are in your ward, whether they're downtown or not? If it's in your ward, it's in your ward. Whether you're interested in reevaluating those in order to make room for there to be equity across this city. Eric and I also had a good discussion about the difference between equality and equity, and that some of the work with parks and roads has been equality, and we've come a long way with that, and I'm really grateful for that. But in terms of investments from this city, we have been behind the game in one specific ward. So just want to have that conversation with all of you. Because we can't do anything without knowing your positions.
I'll turn to Commissioner Allen, but I am curious, do we have a longer list with some dollars associated with them?
I do.
Because I think it would be helpful if this is only a limited number and none of us were a part of that conversation and we don't know what the other needs are or the amount for those other needs, or at least a sense of what those costs are. I think looking at the overall budget, it's difficult to know how much needs to be reconsidered and where the potential is for that. I mean, one of the things we just talked about was increasing money to our fund balance. I mean, maybe we need to look at that and say, you know, we should reduce that a little bit and be at 9.6 instead of 10. So I think that larger conversation would be helpful for me anyway, is to know, are we talking about 10 million or 3 million or 1.2? So I'd like that additional information. And sorry to cut Commissioner Allen off. So I'll let Commissioner Allen go, and then Commissioner Lanier, if you want to share, and then I'll let the others who are here weigh in.
So Commissioner Lanier and Eric met one-on-one after the last meeting, and I appreciate her advocacy for our work. And this is a start, but to me, Eric, I think what I heard you say that I think is the most important is that on a going forward basis, and I want to memorialize this so that doesn't get glossed over, is to start this process earlier on before the budget is actually created. I really appreciate that. And as an example, at the last Economic Development Project team, Dave B. from West Michigan Planning.
Regional
Planning. Thank you.
Yeah, who serves on that?
That would be me. Dave came and presented and was with engineering, and there's some dollars coming in from the feds, and it was all engineering dollars. And as we sat there, it was the same thing. There was a priority of like 6 or 8 things, and not one of them was in the 3rd ward. But when I read, they were all in the 1st ward. And when I read the West Michigan planning groups, when I read the prerequisites for the grant, there were some tailor-made things for the 3rd ward about job creation and reutilization of industrial areas. Look at what's going on in the Cottage Grove area, where some dollars could be added to that. So I brought that up, and again, it wasn't any fault of any city. They never really thought about, wow, before we start this, maybe we should take a look at this and look at this across wards, you know. And so I think what happened going back to that time in that meeting is something that I think just needs to filter down through the whole organization, that it's looked through that lens, because I know I'm only going to be here for 2 more meetings after this, but you know, I can guarantee you the 3rd ward is not just going to sit by and let this keep happening. I mean, yeah. So I appreciate what you said, Eric, and I hope that going forward in future budget sessions, that happens from day one. That there's just that conversation, at least a look at that and an engagement about, you know, where are those dollars spent.
So, Mayor, to answer your question,
go ahead.
so there is a list. Some of the items on the list were items that Commissioner Allen and I and Eric talked about, you know, since that meeting in the fall that we've talked about. And then others are kind of bigger ideas that have come within the last couple weeks. So the first thing I'll say is I think in light of us not having a whole lot of time, we may not necessarily have dollars attached to the projects, because there hasn't been enough time in the last couple weeks to say this is how much we would need. I am going to put words in Eric's mouth, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's hesitant because he doesn't have the dollars. So, you know, one of those conversations I said a number and his eyes got this big. And it's because he has a budget that's done and ready to be voted on, essentially, and he's strapped because he doesn't have the resources to be able to move around. But if he hears that there's interest in that, I think that would help him to know to start putting the dollars attached to some of the items and do the homework to put the dollars attached to some of the items, because I think part of why number 4 is there is because it's talking about ongoing. And I said to him even this morning, Eric, it's not enough to do something in the future. We have to do something with this budget cycle too. But again, I'm also understanding the position that he's in. So what probably would be the best thing to do, instead of me rattling off this list, maybe Eric and I can sit down and put numbers to the list and then send it back.
Yeah.
But I really do want to hear from my colleagues what their position is, because it won't make sense for the two of us to go through this exercise if no one is willing to give up what's being allocated within this budget to their to their respective wards.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, and I think we talked about this last time we met too. Is I think that we need to start looking at this city as a whole city, and if one part of it is hurting, then the whole body is hurting. And I guess what I feel like I need is for this commission to talk about some priorities. We have to take what we've learned from the Rose Fellowship. We need to look at things like housing and transportation and all the different city services that we have, as well as capital improvements, and begin to map that and then address that. And that's a big project. So at least for this year, I kind of like the idea of, because we're as far along as we are, so the answer is yes, I want to do that. And I know that the Third Ward is one of those areas that has too many pockets that need to be addressed. But I think it takes a thoughtful conversation about what that means. I don't want to determine that for others without having that conversation or make any assumptions on my own. I think this body needs to think it through carefully. So perhaps to the mayor's comments about the budget stabilization program, that might be one place to look at that while we are exploring what this means and how it will look, and starting to plan for that for the future.
Yeah. I mean, we just talked about moving that. So I think we can get. I think we can get there, but Commissioner.
And I think something that's terribly frustrating, especially being the first ward commissioner, right? Like the third and the second ward are pretty congruous, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like they're there, and then some of our stuff is, gerrymandered off into Never Land down there, and so no, and it's
true. It's you have a very odd.
And so something like I understand wanting to create equity and parity between the wards is important, but there's also things that it's hard to track how some the fire station on Division, while it's in the first ward, I bet that fire station serves the third ward as much or more than it probably does the first ward, right? Even though it's in my ward. Or Garfield Park being on the border of the first and the third ward is a regional attraction for the first and the third ward as well, and probably for people from outside the city. And so, absolutely, we need to make sure that it's being served, but I think we have to look at how that happens too, because, I'm sure Garfield Park not being in the third ward, you still wouldn't want anything negative to happen to it, because a lot of people that you represent use that as their primary recreational focus. So it's we got to think about this carefully, and it's important that we do spread that out. I think one of the things first ward projects is lighting under sewer. That's a very direct thing that impacts the people in my neighborhood. That doesn't do your constituents any good, but that's certainly something that I think my constituents and folks that are doing some pretty important projects that needs to happen for the connectivity to, my ward's separated by 2 highways. That's a significant challenge that my ward faces all the time in getting people to cross a river, cross a highway. And so to me, that's something very important, even though it's not a huge dollar amount. I don't want to give that up, but at the same time, also don't want to give up a fire station because it benefits both of us. So I'm willing to have the conversation, but it's just want to figure out how we look at what lens we look through that at.
Maybe we should just annex everything this side of 131 into the third ward and be done with it.
Yeah.
I still go back. I think ultimately what, at least for me, what would be helpful is to have a better sense of what the needs are and the gaps are, and then have a sense of how much that costs. So, Commissioner.
No, I agree, Mayor. I think it's a necessary conversation to have, and it's one that needs to happen right now with a significant sense of urgency to be able to take a good hard look at numbers. And I think any conversations around equity, there's no way to do equity in a way. Very rarely are you able to pull off equity in which all sides are pleased or happy. You're going to have some folk who are probably somewhat disgusted because there's a reason that you need to weigh the scales in a certain direction, because historically it's, if it's been inequitable, it's just, it keeps weighing it down. And so yes, let's, I agree with Commissioner Lanier that she should probably sit down with Eric and take a look at the numbers. And I think, you know, from where I sit, from the Second Ward's perspective, let's take a good hard look at, you know, what is priority? What you know, are the projects that absolutely need to be done right now, and are there projects that can, you know, it's okay if we wait, you know, for the sake of equity, because I think it would speak volumes, especially as we move the discussion forward and operate with a much more proactive lens for future budget preparation.
Great. Okay, I'm just going out and I'm going to let Commissioner Lanier take over.
Yeah, so for the sake of time, what I think I'm hearing is,
Yep, thanks.
and I appreciate the input that we've gotten so far. So what I'm hearing is that Eric and I will sit down and try and put numbers, got a lot of work to do, to this list. But I'm also hearing, and I think Commissioner Jones, this is actually a really good point, that if First and Second Ward commissioners would look at their own capital investment projects and prioritize their list at the same time we're trying to create this list, that will help us to come back to the table with some decisions about, you know, okay, what are the priorities here and what are those dollar amounts? Because again, I think he hasn't corrected me so far, but I just think without having any dollars available, you know, we've been strapped with what could be done. And so I think if you all could take a look at the capital investment list, and I think it was presented last meeting, so if you have the packet from there, it should be in there. And then kind of look at what those numbers are for your respective wards, and then come back to say, here's where we are in our priority list. So maybe it isn't this year to do this, maybe it's next year,
right,
or whatever. That may help us to figure out what we can do.
So before Jeff speaks, I'd like to say something. So the capital improvement fund, the capital reserve funds are finely balanced, and you're absolutely right about that. And there are demands there that that we have to be aware of. So one is you know, Dunnigan water main, you know, making sure we're taking care of what's going on and our commitments in that area. We've had an asset management commitment which takes care of a lot of dollars for buildings and stormwater and other, and we can point out those to you. So when it gets down to discretion, we have some discretion, and we want to exercise whatever it is we have in the best possible way. So we have to, you know, we just have to know that as we're going in. So what the mayor said about the budget stabilization fund before she left, you know, those are dollars that, you know, I wouldn't use. I would never recommend using those dollars for operational issues. But if we make valuable one-time investments, that's a different story. So then it's a question of, is 9.5% enough? Is 10% right? You know, those are policy questions. So, so Jeff.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, we could pass this budget today as is, in the first meeting in July, change it all. All we need to do is bring forward a BA. So if you all get together and say, hey, we want to reevaluate this, because we have to have a budget passed, we all know this, by this certain due date. So we could pass it all tomorrow and come in with a budget amendment the first meeting and say we're going to reallocate money from whatever project over to this new project, and we'd be totally fine. So.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And Jeff, one other thing. So in the budget resolution that we adopt, there are certain clauses and things that we say. So, for example, if we wanted to include like Statement 4 or something like Statement 4 on this sheet that I handed out, that's something that we could perhaps include in the budget resolution to give staff direction.
I think so. I'd have to check with the attorney, but yes, because that's a formal.
Because that then would memorialize
so.
the process. And this, Cindy, I want to thank you for the time you spent with me today. And also, that's where number 4 came from. Is we need to do better on a long-term basis, and this is similar to the process we've started with the general fund, with operating budgets. So it worked really well to get started that way with operating budgets, and this, what we've learned there we can put to good use on the capital side. And I think putting it in the resolution so we have very clear direction might be a good way to go. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Anything else?
Okay, so if you, I know we're past our time, if you'd like, we could briefly go through the letters, so you, the memos that you got, so you know what you got, or we could dismiss ourselves and we could pick it up next week. It's up to you.
Let's do B, since we've, yeah, I'm hearing people want to read. I know the mayor was saying the same thing, and we've lost a couple, so let's do B and pick it up next week.
All right, great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a good day.